And it struck me that most people don't develop past that point artistically. Most adults don't go past that high school art class or that 2 years that they learned a foreign language or played an instrument in school, you know, and that struck me as so sad. In terms of just people no longer, like, at what point does that stop becoming an acceptable activity? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is it when you should be studying for SATs and thinking about going to school? Is it when you should be getting a job? Is it when you pick your mom up at the hospital or from rehab? Or, like, what the fuck is it? You know, like, I'm going deep, dark places with Bob Ross.
All right, everybody. Welcome to Waiting to Dry. You know, here at Waiting to Dry, we have a real high quality standard of hosts. So we had to kick out one of ours that we had here.
I hate this guy, Josh Lawyer. He's dead inside. He hates himself.
So, yeah, it's a real tragedy. So we have Dennis Brown, Bagger 43, on the podcast guest hosting today.
Greetings. Second time on the show.
Yeah.
Guest host.
We have Gage Opdenbrouw. Did I say that right?
You did, actually.
Right.
That's pretty amazing.
Awesome. Is that Dutch or what?
It is.
Oh, okay.
It is, man. Wow. You are two for two on some. You know, people just phone shit in, and my name is the first.
Yeah.
I actually get.
What's the worst you've heard?
Well, I get mail for, like, they just correct it, like George Oppenheimer. No, it can't be. Let me just. It must be George Oppenheimer. When when I see that one, I'm like, no, it's not.
That's hilarious. Oh my god.
Yeah, so that's the most egregious, but you know, yeah.
Well, cool, man. We are at your studio right now, and on a bit of a warm Oakland day, actually. And
yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah. Good that this worked out.
Yeah, absolutely.
You caught me at a busy time, but yeah, it's nice that the sun is out and the days are long. The rain seems to really have retreated to a reasonable level.
Right, yeah. See the brown of the hills pretty soon here.
Yeah, you can see it right out the window here. I got my, little Mount Saint Victoire set up. I haven't really started painting that yet, but I intend to.
Yeah. Yeah, the thing about these Oakland hills, there is something very paintable about them to me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, and there's a lot of cool little spots that you wouldn't necessarily know about. Like, if you go up Seminary from here, right when you get to the bottom of the hills, just past Mills, go under 580, and then there's this crazy creek trail with a waterfall. It's super forested.
Wow.
Yeah. You hike up, like, it goes alongside Redwood and campus. It comes up at Merritt College up there.
Wow.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So, with the dogs, we go up to Redwood and go hiking all the time. So there's a lot of hidden little places in the hills that are cool.
Nice.
I have thousands and thousands of photos that I've taken on my hikes. We probably take 3 good 5 to 8 mile hikes a week.
Oh wow.
Nice. And I take dozens of photos on every one. I'm never satisfied. Like, when I try to paint that stuff. I don't know. Maybe it's because I love the hikes so much that the paintings are just like, there's missing a little something.
Yeah, they always are. I get that for sure. Especially if it's just like on your phone, but even like a good digital camera, just there's always something missing in it. Like, I feel like the further I get away from if I take a photo of something that I'm inspired to paint from, the further I get away from it, the less inspired from the photo that I am when I look at it.
Yeah.
Over again.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that's it. It's not so much a question of, like, there's being information in the photograph or not, but just like my drive to paint it, I don't know, the experience itself is better than, like, painting's a struggle to make sort of inadequate memory.
I know, yeah.
Whereas with some things that it can be a good relationship, but I think, I just like being in the forest more. But I did a big show years ago that was all paintings of groves of trees, kind of taken off from, those early Mondrian paintings that, long before he went so reductive, but he did, there's this period in his work early on where he was really playing around with landscape forms and really like flattening things in interesting ways.
I don't know if I'm that familiar with them. Maybe I could. So that's kind of how you sort of think of it, like in a flattening things out sort of way?
Almost like if you were to reduce composition to just like a grid of horizontals and verticals, how the tree branches represent like an organic version of that, and like all the points and layers, like kind of a constructed artificial space through each line, So it's kind of an abstract idea, like I've been fascinated by groves of trees as a subject for a long time. I'm sure I'll return to it. I guess for right now, it's mostly just photos. Yeah, there's a pretty wide variety, but they're interesting in how he's playing with the abstraction and kind of like, definitely a reductive, they're not super naturalistic, but there's much more naturalism in them than, his later work.
Right.
Yeah.
Nice.
So when you're thinking like, is that a sort of a compositional sort of consideration you're going for when you're trying to fit the landscape in a grid?
I mean, kind of. And I'm not thinking of it as a grid necessarily, more just like a constructed space.
Right.
Where each mark kind of constructs a spatial position. And I think for me, that's one of the things that's really interesting about landscape painting is the way that, that you can do that. Like, in a still life, you can really have like, you can still create space, but the way that like a shift in color or temperature can like create like a large space in a landscape, I think is really fascinating. And so I think for me, I paint a lot of open spaces, like this this islandscape here or some of these kind of horizon-y things. I tend to be drawn to deep spaces. And then with the forest, I think it's interesting because it's that feeling, but all the, everything that's woven in between you and the sky and the distance,
Yeah.
So it's not quite all the way to Wolf Con, but like that's, it's getting into that neighborhood probably in terms of like, or like Fairfield Porter's landscapes. I like a lot.
Sure, yeah.
So I've been drawn to more flattened kind of modernist work for sure.
Do you like Wolf Con's work?
I mean, I can, in general. I mean, I think like anything, it can, it can be deadened by repetition, suffer from coffee cup syndrome,
Coffee cup syndrome?
Like Monet or like, that's what I think of when I think of like great painters like Monet or Van Gogh.
They end up on coffee cups, is that what you mean?
Yeah. It's the whole exit through the gift shop.
Sure,
yeah. You forget that stuff was so kind of vital and like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know, when Stravinsky
for sure,
did Rites of Spring and the audience threw things and walked out and stuff, I don't know. Like, there was some outrage about that painting being, and that's what I mean. Now to us, it looks so domestic. It looks like something you would see on grandma's fridge.
Right.
Or whatever, know.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw the Monet show when it was here. Yeah.
I didn't. I heard a lot about it. What did you think?
I thought it was pretty great. Looking at the paintings, just as a whole, it wasn't too much of a revelation. Like I kind of understand like the context of like Monet where he's working from, but the like seeing the work, the impact of the work itself, these giant paintings in a pretty well lit space, but just the amount of paintings and the amount of big paintings that they were took on a whole different dimension that I'd never seen Monet in that context before.
Right.
And then also my favorite thing actually to do when I was looking at the paintings was to kind of break them up into little like sections of the paint where you could see a more abstract design within the larger paintings. So that was really cool. And then just kind of studying all the different color schemes, like playing on each other like that was really cool.
And wasn't there something about, I guess he was starting to have vision problems at the time that he painted these, right? Like that part I wasn't worried about. These are like the big water lily paintings, like the big like screen size. Like,
yeah. And then they had a bunch of ones that he did of the Japanese bridge in his garden. And then the very last ones that toward the end were just pretty nuts. Like they were just swirls of color that were probably the least representational work that he did. But probably the most exciting as far as the color goes. There's all these reds and oranges against greens and purples and stuff. It was pretty interesting to see in person.
Yeah, I
but
totally missed that. I was like traveling or whatnot, so
right.
I missed I guess when was the last day or the?
I think it was last Monday or the maybe a couple weeks ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
But yeah, it's that whole thing, the coffee cup syndrome. That, I mean, Monet is probably the biggest culprit of that. Like, not of his own doing, obviously, but but also even we were just talking about Klimt, Dennis and I, and for as much as like he's on, you know, like everybody knows that painting, The Kiss and all that, and it's on calendars and all that, but his work, like if you see it, if you actually understand painting, you also know that he was pretty badass. Like when it comes to
his range is
work.
Pretty crazy. Like, so I was actually in Japan. Just came back from Japan like a week ago, and I got to check out a couple Klimt exhibits out there
in Japan.
Yeah, which is
I'm sure he's well appreciated.
Oh
there.
Yeah, super. Yeah, it was a pretty crazy turnout. I guess the time I got to check out the show, but like no, the collection was actually pretty amazing because. I mean, as you know, like Klimt's, I guess like his more iconic work is like the kind of heavy decorative, like gold leaf pieces and whatnot. But to see a good collection of his like early work, where he had they had a full array of his like academic work, which was
make a draw, right?
Yeah, I mean... his range is like hands down amazing. I mean, just like. I mean, yeah, they had a collection of super refined kind of charcoal drawings alongside like really refined tight oil paintings of like just like figure studies that if you were to see just that work and then put it next to his like more later work, like you definitely wouldn't think it's the same artist, but pretty amazing exhibit though.
Yeah, and then even his drawings, if you see his later pencil drawings, you know, they're
it's like way more
just
gestural.
Beautifully fluid, like Schiele, if he didn't drink all that coffee, it wasn't so crazy or whatever. Like there's a calm, restrained, like, you know, there's that story or whatever about how, you know, Schiele wanted to trade with Klimt, and Klimt was like, I don't understand why you would want one of my drawings, but okay.
That's crazy.
Oh, really?
You know, I spent like a long weekend in Vienna about 10 years ago. I was in Europe for a couple months, and I went there, and just to see just the two of those guys in all the museums there. But like in Vienna, you know, there's a good 4 to 6 like kind of world-class museums, you know. So between just Klimt and Schiele and like Friedrich. I mean, all the European masters you would expect, but just both of those guys were a revelation. And, you know, what I saw a lot there, and now there's books of them that you can get, but there's, Schiele's landscapes, which are much less known, but I think are equally innovative and forceful to his figures. Really designed, really, you know, all that interesting designy, selective kind of drawing-based quality. You know, that's all there in the landscapes too. They're really interesting. But I saw a bunch of those, and they're cool to experience in person too, because a lot of them are big. You know, like not huge, but like 3-4 feet. Okay. You know, kind of. They feel very contemporary.
Did you get to see a collection of his Schiele's like still lifes, like some of the flower pieces? I think I saw like they actually had one of his pieces there, but it's just crazy when you look at like just the stylization of them, and how like. I mean, for the time, I mean, I guess he was painting these like literally like 1900, like was it 1903 or something? Like, it's pretty crazy how it holds up over time, but it's crazy. But so I'm curious, like, I know we're kind of like jumping right into like a mix of different topics, but
let's do it.
I'm kind of curious to hear a little bit, I guess, just about your backstory on like, so you're originally from San Jose.
From San Jose, yeah.
And then you said you've always lived in California?
Yeah. I lived in San Jose until the mid-'90s. Moved to San Francisco to go to school.
Okay.
You went to the Academy of Art?
I did.
Yeah. Did you? Yeah. What years were you there?
It's like 96 to 2001.
Oh, okay. So, we wouldn't have ran into each other then. Because I was there from 01 to 06. So
okay, so we nearly overlapped.
Yeah.
But not quite. Yeah.
How was your time there during that time?
I mean, it was good. I met so many amazing students. Like I had so many great peers.
Oh yeah.
Just that aspect of it alone.
Yeah, that was a really good time to go.
I think far exceeded any of the teachers, and I think there was sort of a camaraderie amongst a lot of the students. It was kind of funny because a lot of us, I feel like, coming from very different frames of reference. When I started school, I was studying illustration. I just thought it'd be practical.
Yeah.
Like it was really difficult for me to manage to go to art school and so I didn't want to just be, vague about it.
Right,
for my own sake and
Yeah.
family, and I'd always liked, more figurative, yeah. Illustration seemed like it might have been appealing, but by the time, so I had really great instructors in drawing in particular, and I just did tons and tons of life drawing and had a great anatomy teacher, did several semesters of anatomy,
Nice.
I probably took 4 or 5 sculpture classes, which I would say has actually really informed my painting pretty deeply.
Nice.
I mean, particularly when it comes to the figure, but just in terms of seeing form in planes, really starting to understand that.
Nice. So I'm curious, like with your, I guess, because initially you came in as an illustration, and I guess at what point was like the deciding factor to kind of make that switch to fine arts?
Well, I just found that the illustration classes just didn't seem right for me. I wasn't interested in explaining anything.
Yeah.
I wanted to make things more mysterious and murkier if possible.
Right.
I just there was nothing. And then combined with sort of the, I don't know. Yeah, just nothing in it, and it spoke to me. And and in the meantime, I felt like I'd gotten my sea legs after a couple of years of drawing all the time. And we'd have studio classes for 6 hours, and then, have an hour break, and then go back and draw or paint at workshops until 10 o'clock at night. It was like 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. There were a whole bunch of us
that was my routine.
Did
there
that,
too.
and we all, hung out together, and a lot of us lived downtown, and so it was just very immersive that way, and we just really put a lot of miles under our belts. But at a certain point, I just felt like I didn't understand painting itself the way that I wanted to.
Yeah.
And the illustration courses per se, like the core classes of the major, weren't speaking to me. And so I went over to the painting department, which was much smaller, but and so I had a bunch of awesome teachers over there and was able to kind of, I think my last year I did a few different independent studies, because there were the advanced level painting classes I wasn't particularly interested in. Like I loved like the quick studies class with Craig Nelson.
I love that class.
Great, man. I learned so much from that. Like I can't think of a single more important painting class.
I'd say,
that I always taken,
I always say I learned to paint in that class, really. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I feel like that still serves me really well.
Yeah, same here.
When it was, let's do a 15-week painting of a nude on a couch, I was kind of like, if I have to compromise with anybody else about the model, the couch, the light, a single thing, I'm walking. I'm not 15 weeks. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
15 minutes, 15 hours outside if I have a good angle and a model I like, but like... So I feel like I was lucky because I was able to sort of talk to people and find instructors that were down to do independent studies. And so in that respect, I was kind of like off on my own artistically by the end of school before I graduated. I was kind of digging into things that were interesting me already at that point. It was a good school if you were aggressive about making sure you got classes that you wanted and like teachers that you wanted.
Agree.
Like if you didn't like a teacher, drop the class and switch to somebody else. I mean, you knew from talking to people who were a year ahead of you or whatever, and so yeah, it was interesting. But to talk about, you were saying you like to talk about the whys and wherefores, the philosophical side of it. I mean, I would say it's definitely like notably weak on that side in terms of,
because it was like super. Well, I didn't go to the academy, but I guess from my understanding of the fine arts department, it was like
it sounded like
technical.
Your illustration training was kind of really similar, actually, where because you went to, what was it again?
I went to Ringling, but I mean, so my background went to Ringling, and I focused on illustration, but kind of more so just to get a better, I guess, grasp on actually how to paint and how to technically like develop an image, because our fine arts department was heavy on the conceptual side. So
right.
Kind of leading,
which is another common difficulty that students had at those times that I think now, as someone looking to study painting, would not have that same kind of difficulty. You know what I mean? Where it's kind of an either or.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I guess a generation previous, it would have been either or in a different way. Or a few generations back. Like I was struck looking at there's a book that it's got the title's like Painters Talk About Painting or something.
Okay.
Like that, Painters on Painting or something like. But it, it's from the 50s and it's got. I want to say like Morris Graves and Mark Rothko and Ben Shahn and Edward Hopper. And so, like Shahn and Hopper are very, Shahn especially is strident.
Well, he did a lot of writing.
What's that?
Well, I'm saying he did a lot of writing and kind of heavy on the philosophical, like.
Well, for sure, and he had the whole social and kind of conscience part to his work. But I think they were just it was so polemical then between abstraction and representation, and then it seems like after a certain point, then it became polemical between object and idea. And, somewhere along the line. Anyway, that was we didn't talk about that. In the painting department at the academy, that edge is too hard, or that that blue is too the same everywhere, or those kinds of critiques. We're being guarded. Hold on, guys, we're in danger. He's got a penetrating bark, man. You can hear him anywhere in the building if you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, he thinks I'm leaving if I go to do my laundry or whatever. I'll go downstairs, and you can hear him like through the floor in the garage.
Damn.
Yeah. He projects. So, that's one good thing. I'm not worried about anybody breaking in here, especially.
Oh, yeah.
So from your time, because you said you graduated at 2001.
Yeah.
So how was coming out of that program? How was jumping into, I guess, the real world, and also like, I guess like the Bay at the time being like, I feel like, I guess how would you describe like the Bay Area art scene? I guess, or kind of overall, just I don't know. I guess what was going on in the Bay
at that time. Yeah, it sure feels like a different time than now. But I think it's interesting because I look at it, I think about, when I was in school, it was like the .com years in San Francisco, and then that kind of tanked, but it's not like things got easier. It's just like the squeeze slowed somewhat for a little while. So, it seemed like, I got out of school, ideas-wise. I wasn't super engaged with anything that we had learned at school, other than like I picked up sort of like the technical representational chops that I needed to feel like I knew how to paint and draw. And then I got a studio right out of school with some great folks in the Mission, with my friend Andy Hope. And there were a bunch of us. There were probably 8 artists at one point that all had studios there. It was like a house with 3 flats in it, and then there was a courtyard and a carriage house out in the back. And
okay, that's cool.
Like a good half dozen studios in there, and it was kind of amazing because we had this real like conspicuous lack of influence. It was like we'd throw great parties for open studios. Sometimes we'd have bands play and whatever, but we would always. People would come over, and it was just like, it wasn't like, this little nest of like, oh, look, this place is all lowbrow artists, this place is all, blue chip conceptual artists, it was very like, you'd kind of walk, here's paintings, and there's a video installation, and there's a chandelier made out of pills, and
it's like a true art party.
Yeah,
right. And it was fun, but it was interesting because it was a totally different. I feel like then there was so much fun stuff going on in San Francisco and the Mission, and in particular, and.
I could imagine just like the cost of living and like. I've been in the Bay for like 10 years now, but I just remember, like early 2000s, and just the vibes felt so lively out here.
San Francisco is really a different city. If you want the conversation to take sort of a dark, grumbly old man turn, you can get me going on that one. I think most people that know me know what I think. But yeah, it is fun to think about. Like it was a fun city then, and I'm sure if you're determined now, it's still fun. Now I'm more just trying to get some work done, and painting's a solitary pursuit by and large. Although the community that we're able to have these days around it is so much better. It's so cool that we can all meet like this independently of, back in the day, right? Like we might have seen one of each other's shows or whatever, but not, you know what I mean? You might be able to like look somebody up on the internet and shoot them an email. They'd have a website after a certain year or whatever. But before that, it was like, I have some books, some here in this rat's nest that are like, pages torn from Art News and Art in America.
Oh, really?
Yeah. That was like when I was in school. That was like, and I'd see stuff that I really liked. Like, just based on the strength of an image.
Yeah.
It's usually an image, the artist's name, the gallery's name. Every once in a while there'd be a catalog. But anyway, there was so much in between. It was dumb luck. If you got to see the images or get acquainted with the work. Even more dumb luck if you were able to meet the artist or have a conversation with them. And then, you know what I mean? And now it's kind of interesting because I think the mediation of something like social media, like Facebook or Instagram, it's still there. And searches and whatever else are all skewed. But at the same time, it's just like, the way that we can directly connect with one another and have conversations about our work, and the variety of work that I'm able to see, is just incredible.
Oh yeah.
There's so much, and so for me as an artist with a traditional training who has a really kind of abstract sensibility, like I've always, like if I have to, describe myself to a civilian who has no art frame of reference, say, I have a traditional training, I can paint realistically if I want to, but I'm much more interested in a more abstract take on that. Like I'm far too traditional for MoMA, and I'm too weird for most of the like Art Renewal Center crowd.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I'm not into that. I think ateliers are an incredible resource for students. Like essentially that was most of the best things that I got from the academy. Probably I would have gotten in that context.
Sure. Yeah.
But then like Craig's class, I wasn't able to study with Sorolla or Hawthorne or Dickinson or one of those guys.
Sure.
So, and that was just, I stumbled on that, but I didn't know. It really pushed me, to places that I didn't know I was capable of going. Really, like you said, it taught me to paint.
Oh yeah.
What kind of a painting can I make in 20 minutes? What can I catch? It's like the beginning of literacy, I guess.
Wait, so I guess you said, are you referencing the quick study classes? So I'm curious, I guess with that, what do you feel like was the biggest takeaways kind of going through that process of the quick studies?
Just how to put something down clearly and forcefully, just economy, like learning how to paint in a way that's, extremely discriminating, but bold and simple.
Just
also
super direct, right?
Super direct, like for the same reasons that like great gesture drawings have something totally different than a great slow drawing will ever have. You know what I mean? It's just that there's that compression of attention that happens.
Right.
Yeah.
like a skateboarder that's on the edge of a handrail, knows he's going to lose his teeth, you know. There's that like in the moment thing. That's what I think. I know that sounds really romantic, but I swear, like, that's where I feel it is. Not so much in the romance of it, because honestly in the moment I'm like dissatisfied with the struggle of trying to reach out and catch something so quickly. But like, if you're lucky, you know, like, I think it pushes your powers of observation to another level, where you're synthesizing and condensing information, you know. Like, I did this weird project once that was it was like an illustration job. There were these big paintings on silk for an opera, for the SF opera. What was it? I think it was Turandot. Some opera set in China. And I was hired by an event company that wanted, you know, okay, we're going to do this big hall and we're going to have these copies of paintings, traditional Chinese paintings of Chinese emperors. And, you know, so the originals are like ink, watercolor on silk. And, you know, they hand me these little tiny, like, you know, 100 by 300 pixel JPEGs. They're like, yeah, we want this to be 6 by 9 feet. I'm like, do you have some better reproductions of these paintings? And they're like, this is it. Jesus. So, you know, I did a little independent research, but it wasn't like they really cared which ones they were. And so there were some interesting variation in styles, you know, because there were some Japanese artists, some Chinese artists, and there were a couple Western artists or Chinese artists with Western training. So there was some difference in kind of the pictorial vocabulary in each one, but man, copying those things, I'm telling you, that was an education, because I had to paint like, you know, like silk on fabric. You know, I just got these big unprimed canvases stretched, and then I painted with diluted acrylic on the you know, so it's like being a calligrapher for a day. It makes you really appreciate the subtlety and the skill, you know, that the traditional Asian artists drew with, you know, the way that they would condense so much into like yes, it's very stylized. It's very much a departure from nature, but it's so sophisticated. You know what I mean? And just be like the subtleties of like how much one line can do if it's really crafted, you know.
Nice.
Yeah, for me, because I took the quick study class too, and it was just a really simple foundation to build off of. Because the teacher compressed everything from like, how do you go from a start to finish of a painting in like 25 to 40 minutes? Like, that was the goal of the piece. So you start with, you know, the overall big shapes and a strong light and dark pattern, and you go to like the next thing, you kind of model the forms a bit, and then then you do like the highlights and you know, all the like the finishing touches at the end. And so once you've done that enough times, you're like, okay, I get like how the process of a painting can go if I want to go this route. And then as you learn to paint more and more, you can expand and change any part of that thing or of that process. But it's still, at the end of the day, if you want to, you can always go back to this simple foundation that it's like, okay, I can start and finish a painting this way anytime I want, with really any subject that you can break down that way, if I so choose. So it's always a good like foundation to start from.
Yeah, I think it's a capability thing. It's like being able to, you know, there's that famous thing, supposedly Delacroix said that you should be able to draw, you know, like an artist should be able to draw a man that's falling from the 4th story before he hits the ground.
Oh,
like,
sure, yeah.
You know, I mean, just talking shit, but you know, would his paintings of all those epic battles have been the same if he hadn't, like, he stood there and drew horses fighting other horses in their corrals and stuff, you know?
Yeah.
And you see the drawings, and the drawings are not great as drawings, but man, they remind him a lot more when he looks at it, you know? I've become much more aware of that, of like just... Yeah, so I think it gives you the capability to record, to take meaningful notes of something fleeting, I think. And that's been very important to me as a painter. Like, that's kind of a starting point for me. So I think, you know, their ends, you know, like, you know, Zorn-looking paintings done from photographs didn't particularly interest me after I learned how to do it. But learning to do it was valuable.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And then, you know, since then, there are still things from that quick, immediate... approach to painting that are still very, very important parts of my process. You know,
and I'm curious too, like in that class, like how did he apply like I guess even critiquing work, I guess with that being that it's like such a rapid, like did he?
Well, so like Sergio said, he did kind of have a program. He would walk around like a drill instructor and be like, 2 minutes, your drawing should be down.
Right.
4 minutes, your shadows should be blocked in. 6 minutes, your basic lights should be in. 8 minutes, you should adjust local color, and so on. And so the critiques were very much along those lines.
Right.
Like, I think you lost control of the proportions here. Yeah, you lost control of the proportions, or you're losing your contrasts, or you're. Right. The critiques are purely technical.
That's cool.
Yeah, and then when they would go beyond that, it was like sometimes more in the commercial direction, like this. If you just fix that face a little bit, this could be a gallery painting. It wasn't like Gage. This has real feeling. You know what I mean? Like it might have been at some schools. It would have been like that, probably in the fine arts department, but not necessarily there. Or maybe with maybe with other teachers, but that wasn't Craig's department.
Right.
You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I learned a ton from him, and there were a bunch of people that took that class again and again.
Oh yeah,
and it made a lot of sense to me. I could totally see why they did that.
Yeah, I would sit in on it when I could, when he let me. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you also learn. When you do a painting in 20 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour, that exceeds what you thought you could have done in a week a couple years previous, it's kind of earth-shattering. It really makes you reconsider things. And so
right.
So I still, for me, that painting from direct observation still is kind of like, it's like a check-in. It's a meditation, sort of, it's got that kind of intrinsic value to it. To me, just to sort of like I see it as like painting landscapes, like just kind of like staying in shape. Because there's so much that I have to wrestle with in the process of being out there with the light changing. And, there are times, like I was recounting to students last weekend, that there are times where I've been out painting a landscape and I'll look at my watch and be like, it's only been 2 hours? Because this has been 32 paintings all on the same panel, things keep changing, something different catches my eye. And maybe at the end of the day, you just have kind of, a muddled turkey shoot that's nothing to hang on the wall, but you take it home and, I've been amazed at the kinds of information that I can remember from looking at a sketch like that.
Nice. Yeah.
And I think it's that same thing of chasing that immediacy until something clicks and the painting starts telling you what to do.
Yeah.
So I think it's you got your monks that can control their body temperature by by meditating, right, or whatever, and then you've got people that take drugs to get to a transcendent state. You know what I mean?
Sure.
It's it's largely a question of how you get there, but I find that that kind of fast work from life tends to crack that door open for me a little bit.
Cool.
If that makes sense. I know that's making it really vague, but
no. I mean, you kind of went in. No, I hear that. So I'm curious too, with so what you mentioned of having representational kind of foundation, and then you found your way going more into the kind of abstract. I'm curious to hear more about, I guess, how did that transition kind of come about, or how did you find your way kind of where you are now?
Well, so like I said, the kind of pictorial aims that we were dealing with when I was in school were really predictable, and so I think the first thing that happened after I was done with school is that I stopped painting brushy portraits and figures from photographs. I started working from memory a lot more, and from drawings, and kind of, I wouldn't say abandoned photography as an influence, but there was definitely I started to dig more into memory because I liked the degree of abstraction that it imposed, just kind of taking you away from being so literal, right? Because I noticed that there was a certain point for myself, for sure, where you would get so caught up, like, let's say you're painting a very conventional portrait, you know, like it gets to a certain point, you know, where it's like 90% done. You're like, this is a good painting. This is a good likeness of the sitter. The drawing's nice. The composition's elegant, you know, and all of a sudden you're just like preening yourself. It's no longer about the subject at all.
Sure.
You know, and so, and that's a best case scenario outcome, you know. So for me, like, I noticed that there was always a point that I would cross, you know, where things became self-conscious in a bad way. And I stopped, I don't know, like, just, I felt like the more I developed things, the less interesting they became, like on a sort of poetic level, and I found that was what interested me, you know, is that it wasn't literal description, but the description of an experience.
Interesting.
You know, so it's a more introspective relation to the subject.
Yeah.
And so that started to lead me in a more and more abstract direction. And I think for a while I didn't work directly from life much, or at least not. I would draw more, but then paint from drawings, or, you know, because then there became a time where my painterly interests and my academic training were fairly divergent. You know what I mean? Like what I had learned in school reminded me of school. You know, what did I want to do with that? You know, is that language still relevant to what I want to do artistically? You know, and I guess for me, that's just, I've always been a painter. Like when I introduce myself to people, you know, I will tell them I'm a painter before I tell them I'm an artist. And if that means that they think I paint houses, that doesn't bother me at all. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I'm more interested in that, you know? So like at a certain point, I gained some clarity that for me, the process of painting an image, like, you know, that road that I was just describing of going more towards memory and invention, imagination, just working things out on the canvas, I thought was going to lead me to making purely abstract paintings pretty quickly. Like it really seemed that way initially, but then it never quite got there. I always needed some kind of an image to hang something on. You know, I did these paintings that were like, you imagine just finding a phone book, or not a phone book, but a yearbook with, you know, just a grid of headshots, you know, and then just painting that, you know, but now try imagining the yearbook page. You're not actually working from any reference, but just painting a bunch of imagined but vague individuals.
Yeah.
So I had like a whole body of work that kind of used that as a starting point, and then kind of landscapes came into it.
Yeah.
And there's still elements of what I do with the figure paintings from found photos, which you don't see many of around here today. There's some that we could drag out if you wanted, but so there's still things from that body of work that I think are, you know, and then I did go back to finding a reference to that sort of thing, like the passage of time and, you know, memory and all that. So I find for myself, you know, I had to find like where what I respond to is. And for me, as much as, like, take Vermeer, for instance, like there's an artist that has incredible powers of pictorial description. You know what I mean? He can make you feel the difference between velvet and a woven rug and a metal bowl, and, you know, and on and on and on. But it's not just about that. You know what I mean? Like his paintings are always, he takes that technical ability and puts it in the service of something else, you know? So I guess it's a question of finding a way to, you know, what's my relationship to the medium? You know, and so eventually it all became about, you know, I realized that it was the painting of anything and the things that happened in that was like where my legit content was, you know, not so much driven by subject or something preconceived, although of course, you know, like if I have a model coming today, I'm going to paint a figure.
Right.
But I try to leave as much space open to be responsive to what I encounter as possible. And that's every bit as much like how the painting itself unfolds. Any painting could go 90 different ways at the beginning, right? It's like an empty lot. You could go over here, go over there. And you start to have less and less possibilities as you go on, you know. I'd like to think that, you know, I try to preserve that openness for for a while. You know, I like something spontaneous to happen on the canvas, you know, not, I mean, I'll study it as much as I can beforehand, but I'm still open to something better if it comes up. You know what I mean? It's weird. Like I don't do well with linear accumulative planning. Some painters do that really well. Sure, I would imagine you have to do a lot of that for those pieces with the overlays of flowers.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's interesting you bring that up because like the more I've been doing this new series of work, the more I'm actually trying to figure out if like that process that you're sort of describing of like letting the paint and the construction of the painting itself dictate more of the outcome rather than some predetermined point, like with the roses, the work with the girl with the flower patterns on.
Right.
So. Yeah, I have a really good time painting like literal forms.
Right.
I never really want to get away from that. But when I was doing that, there was just so much of this other aspect of oil painting that I felt like I was pigeonholing myself away from when I was doing that other work, that I didn't really have a chance to explore all these other aspects of mark making and, you know, just manipulating oil paint in a way that's more not only personal but brings in some of that mystery. Like the part of oil painting that's where you let the medium itself sort of guide you through and see like where you end up on the other side of it. And that's interesting, using memory to try and do that. Memory, or how much of it is like a memory for you that you're working from, and how much of it is like just invented?
Man, it really varies. I mean, I will say, I think it varies a lot from piece to piece. You know, but more and more, and especially I would say the last few years, like I definitely went through a period where I found myself like not looking at anything, just painting, like just, you know, like I'd start from a photograph maybe, or I'd start from life, but like relatively quickly, I'd just be looking at the painting and trying to respond to what was there. And I think that to me is an important point. You know, when a painting reaches that point, when it starts like suggesting further moves, then I know something's happening. There are times I think that doesn't happen, and you know, it feels like it's on, like it's going somewhere. You're on a trip and you get to follow it. You know, like I hope to have, but then, you know, sometimes like there's that interior over there behind us. I know it's.
Which one is it? The one with the pink sky, or
the one on the top, the one that's leaning against the guitar case above the frame there?
Oh, okay, sure.
So that's kind of intended to just be like a block-in or an underpainting, you know. And I really like that first session, and it's the same thing with the big canvas on the wall above that. That's just a first session, maybe an hour, like,
okay,
you know, maybe two, like block-in, quote-unquote lay-in, you know, first guess on everything. But I really like if a painting has got energy at that stage, you know what I mean? And something spontaneous happens with the way the shapes, the colors, the textures interact, you know, at that stage, then I'm open to it being done then, you know what I mean? I don't want to get it all into the cult of spontaneity like that. I think it's a form of laziness in a certain way, or it can be, you know, it could be a vice, you know?
Yeah, I hear you.
but I do think, like, I do want to get to that place as soon as possible, because that's my feeling. That's where painting begins. Before that, it's thinking about painting. You know what I mean? And sometimes maybe, like, you know, Andrew Wyeth said that about, you know, I get a lot of painting done when I'm not painting. You know what I mean?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Constantly digesting, looking. You guys, I'm sure, can relate to this, right? Like, you go through a long search to find kind of your pictorial idiom and, like, what feeds it. You know, and it, of course, ideally it's changing and growing always, but then you get to a point where you can't turn the damn thing off, right? Like that dish is always bubbling on the back burner. I'm constantly painting when I'm driving in my car.
Sure.
You know.
Yeah.
It's an obsessive thing.
Yeah.
I really, like, I don't feel a lot of choice about it, you know. It's just, you know, personally, I think that's the way it should be. That's what I respond to in the work of other artists. I like to see something that person needed to make.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
I think so. Yeah.
that I feel like, and that could take so many, there's so many different forms of that. Yeah. You know, but like when I think about that lately, like what makes me want to paint, like what makes me want to pick up a brush, or what, you know, when I see a painting by someone else, what makes me want to pick up a brush? It's a couple things. It's like, one, were they in love with what they were looking at, or with what they, you know what I mean? There's just, I want there to be that connection, that like joy of like, I want to do this, you know, and then, you know, was there like a personal need? You know, just that attempt to connect, you know, because it's remarkable to me that we're interested in images at all anymore, as many as we think about that. How many, you know, like I'm looking at my phone while I'm waiting for the coffee to heat up in the morning, right? I'm like, you know, I've seen, I don't know, 50 JPEGs on Instagram by the time I have my first sip of coffee in the morning. It's amazing that we're not completely desensitized, you know?
That's true.
Well, I think, I mean, I can imagine there's probably still aspects of desensitization that happens with just, but no, it's definitely interesting times considering. So I'm curious too, like with all that you mentioned in regards to, like, I guess your process, like, so how does that work? Relative to the workshops that you provide, like, do you carry a bit of that into the workshops, or is that more?
What do you mean?
Well, so I mean, yeah. So for example, like
how do you teach that sort of?
I guess how how are your workshops structured, and like what type of I guess teaching do you help provide?
So it varies. You know, but I think, the theme that I've noticed emerging is not so much, it's interesting. In the past, I taught much more like, and I still kind of want to start with the basics, because I feel like a lot of people don't get good information about just which colors are toxic and which ones aren't, which are transparent and which are opaque, which mediums do you really need? What's the difference between turpenoid and turpentine? In the past, I used to teach a lot of that kind of thing. Now, it's this very philosophical kind of approach, but it's also still rooted in observation and looking. And so, like, the workshop I just did is called Landscape and Memory. And the idea being that we would just go out and paint outside in the morning, and then we meet up in the studio later, right? Because I've always found, and every artist has a different thing for painting outside, but for me, outdoor painting, 2-3 hours, that's it. Even if it's a good one, the light starts to change, and I'm open to all kinds of interesting things, like paint the same place morning to night, incorporate all that different observation into one painting. You could do that, but generally after 2 hours, the lights change, the ideas change. It's either time to start another painting or let this one dry or whatever. And so that was one thing I had to think about when I was thinking about starting to teach again. Is like, well, what's authentic for me? Like, what do I feel like I've got to teach that's unique? Why would someone take a class with me versus somebody else? And I figure there's a lot of people out there that can teach like the linear, straight ahead, nuts and bolts kind of stuff, so my focus has been more on kind of trying to teach that sensitivity of painting from life, but then going beyond that, and not limiting yourself to any one process, So we did like a workshop here that was based on that I called Painting the Ephemeral, and it was just painting just interiors, still lifey, kind of just observed stuff, but quiet, meditative. But the idea too is that it's driven by, so here's the lazy genius of it all, is it's based around what I'm already doing, right?
Right, of course.
But I mean, of course, like that's hard to do though, to find like, so that's the whole thing that I find about teaching that's interesting, and I'm sure you find doing this that way, that it helps you clarify your own ideas, to have to convey them to other people, and then like, you know, well, why do I work the way I do? You know, well, part of it's I'm always working by natural light, you know. And then I also like have this sort of disdain for like, I don't really like a super preconceived idea, you know, like I like to, whatever strikes me that morning, you know, and cuts to the front of the line, that's what I'll paint that day, you know. And so like I try to have that receptiveness be part of what I'm trying to teach. And so we talk about working from life, but then we talk about going beyond that, you know, like, do you feel like this painting's done? No? Okay. Well, what are you thinking about doing to it next? And how are you going to do that? You know, are you going to get the information from a photograph? Or are you going to get it from a drawing? Do you still have the information you want in front of you? Or is it already gone, you know? And so, like, we talked about that a lot with the landscape. Yeah. You know, and so, like, we would paint in the morning and then go back in the afternoon and develop things from, you know, it's not like a... don't you dare use a photograph kind of. I don't have that attitude at all. I think photographs are an amazing aid for remembering certain kinds of information. You know, and they're miserable at conveying other kinds. Right. And so, like, in some ways, I find that, you know, that's, you know, just helping people have a more open definition of what making a painting is, maybe. I feel like that's something that people struggle with a lot. You know, sometimes it's the people that have, you know, had a lot of people tell them that their paintings are great, have the hardest time with that because they feel like this is a thing that I do. And then, you know, it's interesting. Like, I don't know. Everybody comes to a workshop for different reason. Yeah. Right? You know, and I think maybe that format like particularly.
A specific sort of theme that keeps coming up for students?
I don't think I've done it enough to want to sound off on that. I mean, I've just taught like 4 this year after like a 10-year hiatus. You know? Sure. So I'm kind of feeling my way back into it too. But it has been cool because I've been getting, you know, relatively small groups of pretty experienced painters. And so it tends to be like, you know, we don't really have to swoop down to lift anybody up. You know what I mean? Like the conversation's at a certain level already. And I say that with no disdain for people that are less experienced. You know what I mean? I think that perspective's really valuable. But in terms of like just understanding the basics of constructing a painting, these people are all conversant, so we can kind of talk about the bigger issues. You know, how do you maintain authenticity of color? In a landscape, you know, or if you're bothering to go to the trouble of painting from life, why? What are you hoping to catch? You know what I mean? Like, I've got this Antonio Lopez book here. We're looking at that landscape painting now. I've got this Marc Trujillo book, which I think he represents a really different kind of conclusion about what you can do with that sort of information.
I don't know if I'm familiar with him. Okay, so it's like pretty clean, sort of.
A little more, and then this is Rackstraw Downes, who is famous for being a sort of, he's often put out there as sort of a quote unquote new objective eyeball realist kind of, you know, like the landscape equivalent of what Philip Pearlstein is to the figure. Might be the best way to put it. Like he's, you know, sort of anti-romantic, right? Like super quotidian, super, you know, just like.
Is he purely like life observation? Rackstraw Downes?
I think Downes is. Yeah. Trujillo, I don't think is, but he does do a lot of drawings and preparatory work, a lot of which are very beautiful, and they're in there. But he's one of those people that I think has remarkable restraint, you know, like he's an incredibly skilled painter, but he doesn't foreground that part of his, you know what I mean? Like his works are very much about the image and like, you know, he paints beautifully, but they're not about him painting beautifully, and he doesn't let you get like sucked in. And
that's interesting.
Yeah, he paints Costco at 3 a.m, you know, with all the frozen meat, you know. It's like, it's pretty, and it's cool, you know, like if you follow his Instagram feed, you know, his hashtags are things like Chill of the Void and late century capitalism. You know, like, but not super editorial. I mean, he's really smart and keeps the editorial part of it a little low down, you know. It's like there to creep up on you with the buzzing of the fluorescent lights. You know? I think compared to something like that, I'm a very romantic artist. You know, like like I said, I like to be in love with what I'm painting, you know.
Right.
So I'm curious too, I guess as far as like your subject matter, like how do you kind of bounce around between, because like looking through your catalog of works, like, because you have like a mix of landscapes, interiors, figurative,
right?
And then I recall, like, I think there was like some mention of like I don't know if they're necessarily like family portraits or some family.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So yeah, you went and brought out your whole catalog of work almost, but
it's kind of sad how much work I have here in the studio, right?
Oh, we all have similar stories, yeah. But yeah, we're looking at the work now, which is fairly decent sized paintings of they almost look like snapshots of just like the way that a family member would pose with like an aunt or a grandma with a kid or niece or whoever. They invoke this sort of there's sort of a melancholy to a lot of them, but it's more like you were saying about memory. They do feel like the way that memories are in your brain when you try to recall them. Everything's a little sort of fuzzy and out of focus, and in that way, yeah, I definitely feel like that you're achieving that look to them. For you, is it sort of a thing where it sort of matches the mood you're trying to go for when you decide that it's a finished painting, or what sort of end are you trying to get to?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I guess it is really driven by feeling, but it's not necessarily, like I was talking about, something preconceived, like I want this one to necessarily feel sad or whatever. I just thought with these it would be interesting to paint these images in their full emotional ambiguity. You know what I mean? Like they're not when we have one of these photos itself on the wall framed, then we look at it in a pretty sentimental way usually. And it it kind of becomes like your personal greatest hits, out of your family history. You have a particular relationship to it, and then I just thought it was interesting to try to paint those images with like all the distance and the years and all the things that you don't know in there.
Right.
And so I think that's inherently sort of a melancholy project, or at least one that's very much reflecting on our mortality. And so I think because of that, they're not very casual paintings. People would say, oh, they're not happy, or they're certainly not reassuring. I mean, some of these are painted from photos that I found on the train tracks across the street.
Oh, really?
None of the ones that we're looking at right now, but to somebody else. I mean, like a lot of these. So I was struck by seeing a photo of my grandmother when she was, I was probably getting close to 30. And my grandmother was in her mid-20s in this photo, and this was my dad's mom, who I didn't know well growing up. And so, she's familiar to me, but to see her as a young woman, like younger in the photo than, I'm already older, it just sparked so much pondering, just the shock of seeing her as like a different person that she had been as a young woman, like dressed in black, and like, like it was, but then also, like what were her times like, her life, her aspirations. I mean, so you could go like a lot of socially or politically conscious places with it, but for me, it's even more elemental than that. It's just a story of family and attachment and time and generations and, the attempt to pass something forward and remember. But I think it's interesting to look at it honestly with all the dark, sad notes in the piece of music. So there's kind of a vanitas, memento mori kind of theme to all of them in a way.
How did the series kind of come about? Like, was it initially like they kind of I don't know, did you start with kind of like one piece and then it kind of snowballed into...
Sort of. I mean, it was that photograph that I just described of my grandmother that I came across kind of started it. I painted that. And then I liked the sketch that I did enough that I did a bigger painting of it. And then I did some paintings from other photos like that I had around. And I thought it was interesting. And I liked the sort of like, it was almost... like I think I'd just seen that big Richter retrospective in New York. there's something about, like, you know, compared to the sort of obvious feeling that, you know, a lot of my teachers had in their work, you know, like the emotional tone is like very clear, you know. You know, I was much more interested in, like, you know, something that was more ambiguous, you know, and so I think seeing a lot of work like that, like Richter and Luc Tuymans and people like that who had a much more oblique relationship to the image, you know, like the image is a starting point, you know, but then, you know, taking it further than that, there were a lot of different influences, but yeah, it just kind of evolved one painting at a time, and then, you know, people started to like, oh hey, I was at an estate sale and I saw these old photographs, so I bought them for you. And,
oh wow.
You know, and it's interesting. Like I actually like, yeah, and so I like it to just be like that. Like I don't go out of my way to find the images. I just kind of look around. There's some in here right now, just random photographs mixed in there, you know. I don't put them in sleeves and protect them from paint or anything, you know. But like that painting of the family in the garden, you know, it's just like an image. It's like anything else, you know. The image will strike me and I'll want to paint it, you know. And I saw that image of that family, you know, all dressed in white on a bright sunny day, you know, like stand there in front of this wall of greenery, and it's a huge garden, and right now it's probably going to feed the whole family, but within a few months, you know, it's just going to overtake them. There's this ambiguity, like the scale of their figures in front of that, you know. There's just so many, I don't know. So it's a responsive thing, you know. Like I don't know anything about that family, but that, you know, that image just spoke to me. I know I had to paint it. It's painted from like a little black and white, you know. It's like maybe the size of a large postage stamp, you know. It's like a wallet-sized photo. And so yeah, it's kind of just like I said, you know. There's a number of things. Anytime I get a chance to pick up a brush, there's a number of things jostling to get in there to be the thing that I work on.
Sure.
Today, you know, I have a lot of different interests, and so that's one vein, you know. And those are the paintings that are probably, yeah. I mean, I guess they're kind of exclusively reliant on photographs, you know, and it's because of that, you know, thought about time and impermanence that they bring up.
Interesting.
You know.
So with this collection that you pulled out, so I guess how did that show kind of come about? So was it like you kind of generated like a certain amount of work and you were like, all right, this is a good collection to kind of showcase? And I mean, yeah, I'm just kind of curious, like the backstory on the show.
You know, it was a university show at a friend teaches at Shasta College up in Reading, Andrew Patterson, and we have some friends in common. We met a few years ago, and so I guess it's largely a result of like his being interested in this sort of painting. You know, he asked Jennifer Paczynski to do a show up there last year, and even before he'd been there, there were some shows. There's a guy named Kevin Bean, who was a San Francisco artist, who did some work that I think is kind of related to some of this stuff. You know, somewhere in here, David Park and all of those guys come into the conversation. You know, those are artists that I think I didn't think about super consciously. But yeah, when you're asking me, like, how did I kind of transition out of my academic training, you know, I think that was one of the things that I looked at a lot in that period was painters like Park and Diebenkorn and Matisse and Bonnard, you know, people who were really interested in doing something more abstracted, less staged and theatrical, overtly emotional, more concerned with just ordinary daily life, but still full of feeling, but, you know, rich, subtle feeling that's not like a one-note thing, you know. And so, yeah, my diet was heavy on that sort of stuff. And so I think that was part of where I started to see the potential for the abstraction to creep in, you know. And like in the past, when I've had shows other places, a lot of people would ask me, you know, are there still people doing that kind of painting in the Bay Area? You know, you go somewhere else and there's a historical association with the area and those painters, you know. And, you know, I have to say, yeah, there's some, you know, like not that many of them are doing it in a great way,
Sure.
You know, but there are some still that I admire. But it's funny because I hadn't thought of them as overt influences, but I think they are at this point, you know. So anyway, I think out of all of that kind of this conversation, Andrew asked me if I wanted to do this show up in Reading, and it was amazing, man. You know, they have a really nice space up there. And I really like having shows at colleges, you know, university shows, small museums, stuff like that. Can be really cool. You know, it's just the conversation around the work is so different. Like, there's actually a conversation around the work. And it's not hype, you know. It's not hype. It's not commercial positioning. It's not like, you know, the bio is not necessarily a collection of, you know, the bio and the resume are not interchangeable. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. It's just cool. It's an unpretentious place, but a really nice, you know, they have a great art department up there. And I went up there. They asked me to give a talk along with the show. I went up there to give a talk in the opening, and I thought, you know, there'll be 15, 20 people there. I had a few friends and collectors from here that were going to make the drive. But I mean,
wow.
Right? That's what I said. I was like, wow, you guys, you don't have to. That's next level, you know? But there were at least like 100 people at the talk. Wow. It was crazy. Like,
nice.
Apparently response to the show was really good at the school. And I'm not just saying this for our conversation to blow my own horn. I mean, if anything, I was surprised because of that emotional ambiguity in the work. You know, it's not, you know, rosy and sunny. But maybe that's why people like it, because it deals with real life. It deals with real themes, you know? I mean, anyway, regardless, like, it was a great experience, you know. So, and because it was a university show and they're not concerned with selling anything, I could borrow paintings from collectors, you know. And so in that sense, I kind of got to curate it because I was able to, and so a lot of these paintings, you know, because at the time that I did them, I wasn't having regular shows. Initially, they might have been presented that way. But then, you know, I just kind of sold them off a couple at a time here and there to, you know, long-term friends and collectors who would come by the studio, and then never got to show that. You know, a lot of them never got shown, and much less together. And so it was pretty cool on that level to be able to get them all together in a room. And it just felt really... it felt cohesive to me, like, across, and it was a little bit of everything. We called the show Garland of Hours, but I think that theme that's implied by that phrase, you know, runs through all of the work, you know, and so it was mostly centered around these figure paintings from old photos, but there were some still lifes, some paintings of flowers, paintings of windows, some landscapes in there, you know, but it seemed like people seemed to feel the thread that ran through all of it. You know, it wasn't like you know, a situation where people were like, "Is this all a bunch of different artists, or what's going on here?" You know, so I mean, I love that, you know, because I think as an artist, your relationship to your audience is so oblique. You know, as a painter, I feel like it frequently can be. You know, compared to, like, say, being a musician on stage or a comedian, you know, you can feel how things are going in the room, right? You know, like, as a painter, it's like, I get people, I saw a painting of yours 10 years ago. Seriously, I'm like, what? And you remember it? This was an event for you? Like, that's flattering, you know? Like, that's really, like, wow, because I would never take that for granted that would happen, you know? And so I think... You know, in this case, my own low expectations were, you know, just vastly, vastly exceeded by the experience of having the show, and the kind of connection with people and the conversation around it was really, really great. People seemed to be, you know, moved by it and engaged with the work. So, I mean, what more could I ask? I was really flattered. It was a cool thing. You know, I like that. I like that format. You know, commercial galleries are one thing, but then, you know, my somewhat limited experience with, like, universities and small museum gallery settings has been really nice. I've really enjoyed it because there's more of a ongoing conversation, and the shows are typically a little bit longer. There might be a talk, or they might bring kids in or teach classes around the work. Or so it's, you know, it's a different thing. It feels more engaged to me. You know. So
would you rather do more of those kinds of shows?
I'm thinking so. But I mean, of course, I need to, especially now that I don't have a day job, you know, I mean, I could teach workshops, but like, that's not exactly a cash cow either.
That's the balance, right?
I mean, it's fun, but yeah, I got to sell some paintings, man. And
right.
And I haven't put a lot of effort into that. And you can see it in the stacks of stuff that are around here. There's actually a lot of work out at galleries too, believe it or not.
Where are you showing these days?
So I work with I've got the one show up now in Denver with Mark Nelson and Scott Connery, Joe Podlesnik.
Oh, is that a bend? Or
it's not at a bend. I show at a bend too.
Oh, okay.
I was just in a group show, like a landscape show they had a couple months ago.
Oh, okay.
There were maybe 5 or 6 new paintings of mine in that. And then this other group show that we're doing is half a dozen artists. That's up through the end of the month. But that's at another artist studio, friend of Mark's, who had this beautiful space. So he's hosting that one for us. Yeah, and then I show at a band and a gallery in Provincetown called On Center Gallery in Massachusetts. And at John Natsulis Gallery in Davis.
Oh, in Davis.
I had a solo show there in 2017.
Okay.
And we haven't
How do you like showing there? I mean, I know some people who show there and they have, I guess, good things to say about it, but I've never actually gone up to check it out.
About like Davis in general? About the area or?
Well, I mean, I've never done well trying to show my work in that area like Davis or Sacramento. So, I mean, not so much that, but just like that gallery in particular, do you feel like they have a good thing going on there?
They certainly show a lot of painters that I really like. Like Chris Liberty has a show up there right now. He's in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Okay.
He does really interesting work. James Bland, who's an English painter whose work I really like, shows there.
That's cool.
So there's a number of they show a lot of work that I really like. I think for me, you know, I hadn't done a solo show in a long time. And since I was framing everything and building all the panels, and it's like, you know, it's a big space. So it was like, you know, when I had the show, it was great. Like, I love the context that showing there puts my work in. Yeah, he shows a lot of good work. Like, you know, so it was me on one floor and then James Bland on the second floor and Sandy Ostrow on the third floor. And so I feel like, you know, there's like a nice, you know, like, I feel like in a gallery, you want to be like the Venn diagram overlaps in a nice, you know what I mean? Like, there's some nice overlap, but it's not at all like everybody's too close together.
Right.
You know, you know, 3 different great songs off a cohesive album.
Sure.
You know.
Yeah.
And I feel like that with the shows that I've done up there for the most part. You know, like it's been good, but we haven't done anything major since then.
Right. Okay. Oh, cool.
I'm trying to figure out where I think my interest personally with the commercial gallery thing lies mostly in shows like this one that we're doing in Denver with Scott and Joseph and Mark, you know, and William, because it's that same thing of, I feel like, you know, if you don't, it used to be, right, that like if we met and we're both painters, you told me where you showed, I get some idea of the kind of work that you did because I know what that place shows, right?
Sure.
And I think that's probably still relatively true to some extent, but I think also now, compared to how it was before, each one of those galleries is going to have like a much broader net that they're casting in terms of the stylistic variety of their program and kind of, you know, so I have yet to figure out like where. So basically, I work with galleries, but I'm not represented by anyone, especially, you know, even in like a regional way. And I just find that whole part of it just brings a lot of things into it that I'd rather keep at arm's length, personally.
You mean like the
just the emphasis on sales and the and all of that, right? Like I don't know, man. You know, the close look at the sausage machine doesn't really make me, you know what I mean? Like,
I think so, yeah.
It's very like, I find that if it's not, if I don't need it to survive the art sales, you know what I mean? I need the painting to survive. You know, just personally, I would do it. As far as having a show goes and all the commercial stuff, I just think it brings a lot of thoughts into the, you know, because now all of a sudden it's like, you know, I found, especially when I relied on it for the lion's share of my income, it was like I felt like a rat in a maze trying to find some cheese, you know. Like, I know that's really dramatic, but it's a sense of like I never really felt competitive towards other artists or anything like that. It's more just like, how does one work this thing? If I'm going to be successful at monetizing my art, you know what I mean? And just like all the thoughts that branch out from that.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, they are what they are. I mean, those are conversations that are, I think, separate somewhat from like the success or failure of what you're doing artistically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's interesting too how that in that situation it can kind of factor in your kind of development, right? Because you're thinking in terms of like, I mean, like when sales is involved, it affects like the overall like. I guess just the overall development process, right? When it comes to thinking about how you approach painting and
absolutely,
and who's seeing it and who's viewing it, and
I think there's a lot of easy mental traps to fall into there.
Yeah, for sure.
For sure. What do you guys see as the most dangerous ones? What do you think?
The most dangerous ones?
Traps,
or like just the mental bear traps of relying on your
it
art.
Definitely makes you scared to experiment.
Right.
Yeah. You can also kind of fall into trends and kind of lose your own sort of voice in doing that. Like
a bad kind of self-consciousness.
Yeah. Like, I mean, for example, if you're in a gallery, they invite you to show your work there, then you go in there and you're like, well, why is my work even here? Because like I'm doing this, I don't know, like if somebody put your work against like all these like colorful, bright sort of paintings that are very like different thematically from your work, but then you start to see that, oh, they're selling all these bright paintings, it might get into your head that you're like, oh, well, maybe I need to put some more cadmiums in my in my paints just to like start to show up, even though it's like, well, why am I even considering that as a thing? Does this actually fit within what I'm trying to do as an artist, or am I just trying to feel like I'm earning my space on this wall or whatever? Right.
I mean, I feel like there's a lot of variables, but then when you start thinking in terms of like what type of paintings move in certain spaces, it's just hard to not think about that sometimes, you know, where you're just like, okay, well, if certain colors like for sure have a tendency to sales, or like obviously pretty pictures or anything that leads
pretty girl
towards
painting.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, comeback. I mean, not that it ever went anywhere, and I mean, I'm as guilty as anybody. But
yeah, that's definitely like one of the more obvious kind of kind of topics where it's like you could put money on it and it's usually gonna guarantee to move. You know.
So you see it as like a temptation, kind of.
Well, I don't see it necessarily as a temptation, but it's something that I can't help but take note of when you see, like, say, I don't know, for example, like a group show, right? It's like you check out a group show and you can't help but see like what paintings move naturally, right? I mean, obviously there's variables, you know, whether it be like the artist's kind of following or the reputation, but then on the strength of like the image alone and the finished piece, you know, certain themes have a tendency to just come up, like like what you were saying with the pretty girl picture. I mean, that's like you could go to any group show and in most cases that's usually the given, you know, sell piece or whatever. But I don't know, it's definitely I don't know, I mean, I guess that's just kind of how it is in certain in certain cases. But
it's, you know, it's hard to step away from something that's having that kind of success, and I would even you know, question if you feel like you can survive it, you should probably continue. I remember meeting somebody that was showing, conveniently, I can't remember who it was, but it was somebody that I think was showing at like Berggruen or something, one of those blue chip galleries downtown San Francisco, you know. And this person was complaining about, like, you know, they won't stop letting me make these things, you know. Like,
right.
You know, I can't I got to keep making these paintings. I was like, yeah, man, because they're selling for six figures, you know? And you know, you just ride that horse until it collapses, I assume, you know. And the trouble is that horse purely commercial? I mean, like, who is that horse? Is that horse the gallery? Is that like, you know, number one, like, who's taking you for the ride? Where is it going? Who's holding the bag when you're done?
Yeah.
I don't know. There's all these things. I don't know. You know, I feel like the sort of model has changed so much. There's so much. Like, I don't know about you guys. Do you like art fairs? Do you go to art fairs?
I've only been to a few.
Like, I'm just always curious in regards to all the avenues that an image can live, whether it be an art fair, gallery, museum. Right. And it's, I don't know, I'm just kind of intrigued also just by like the system of like how it works, whether it be like, how does the gallery kind of portray the work and how do they speak to the work to who's either trending or, I don't know, kind of like year after year too, you start to see certain kind of either reoccurring artist or, I don't know. I mean,
you can still really see people trying to hit the trends, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's definitely, it's interesting with the market setup because it's really about sales a lot of times because you find, I guess lack of a better term, like gimmicky art, if that makes sense, where you see it and you're like, oh, okay, I see what they're doing here. Like, like, and it kind of takes away from like, like what's the really art about versus just like, oh, this is just like something.
Well, that's one of my objections, man. It's like a highbrow version of a shopping mall with a lot of blinking, flashy lights. There's certain kinds of art that are going to do well in that environment and other kinds that are not, right? I mean, I think it's probably much more just that, like, the whole thing is not to my taste and, like, it's just my personal preference is not, like I don't enjoy things like that, period. But I think... But yeah, I know artists who you go to an art fair with them, and they're like, oh, interesting. Yeah. I see so-and-so's over there. And like, I think you have to have a certain appetite for like the social intrigue, I think. And then I've also known artists that like, to their credit, I think this is like, I wish I could be more this way, but like, I have kind of a list of these are the people that I should meet, these are the people that I need to know to be in the scene that I want to know. And for me, that's a much, much more organic thing that I feel is like, just comes out of like genuine conversations and not going out of your way to, belong somewhere. But I've definitely seen, like, you ever see that, like, oh, yeah, look at the painting so-and-so's making. I guess they're trying to get into that particular gallery. We can all see which one it is. It's kind of wild. You watch that and it's like, and, frankly, like, I've had dealers come to my studio and be like, I like this one. Yeah. If you want to do a solo show of things like that.
Even like, what, 20 of these? Please. Like,
yeah. And I need them to be in the following sizes and, within 6 degrees of Pantone, whatever. I mean, maybe not quite to that extent, but I definitely have had some interactions with dealers that, like, I see that as the same thing as, like, us looking for a motif, though. It's like, as artists, we know what our thing is, where our strengths lie. Like, oh, yeah, this is my thing right here. Yeah. I think a good dealer knows that, too. They know, like, the audience that I've built will respond to this, or they won't. Yeah. And so some dealers will just be like, that's a pie. If you want to bake those pies, you come, or others will be like, blueberry pie is the only kind of pie that's worth a shit. And if you're over here making peach pie, you're a worthless human, Like, damn. I mean, it is weird kind of the pretensions that get into the art world and value judgments that really are nothing more than like aesthetic taste, right? Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm not saying that there's not deep things to aesthetic taste. There absolutely are. Yeah. But I think at the end of the day, you're still like personal preference, and I assume you guys collect art too, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so do I. And so one of the things that I love, a different painting. Number one, I don't keep the same paintings up all the time, although like that red one, that Martin Campos painting there is pretty much always up. And it's usually up here in my studio. I take it down at open studios because people will think that it's one of mine, and then it's not. And they're like disappointed. They're like, maybe one day you'll be that good. Yeah. Or they'll think that they could buy it. Yeah. But I love how that painting strikes me differently on different days, man. I notice different things about it, different kind of light. But then just a different time in your life, you're looking for something different. From art, so I think there's a lot of variation in what What I value out of my own collection is one thing at any given time, and then what I value out of my own work or anyone else's, you know.
Yeah, I just did this week doing a Facebook Live, and I was sharing my collection of art on there. And I have, I just happen to have a lot of landscapes because I've traded with a lot of landscape painters. Right. And I was trying to go through and talk about what I liked about each piece. And something that kept coming up was like a sense of time and place, like of the day and just of the setting. Like a lot of the places aren't even of places I've even been to or people that I know in the subject, but
that's interesting.
The overall sort of feeling of like this artist captured something honest in their work in the way that they depicted like the light and the color of the area is just something that I guess I'm drawn to in that way.
And it's interesting too. I think that's an important difference. You say, you know, these are places you don't have an experience of, and yet you still feel that particular quality. You know, that to me is a real sign of the success of a painting for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's interesting because as a third party, you're an observer to this transaction that goes down between the artist and their work. You know, in this case, a sense of place. You know, fidelity to an observed subject, like a portrait, I guess.
Yeah.
You know, and yeah, you can see when that artist nails that and when they don't. And then if you have a personal awareness or experience of that place, then that just deepens your appreciation of what they're able to capture. But it's amazing that can translate even when you don't have anything to compare it to. You know, and that, you know, so like, you know, you were asking about my name. My family is from Holland, and obviously there's a long tradition of painters there. You know, there's a whole quarter in Amsterdam where the streets are all named after different painters. Even some Spanish ones. I was surprised because they were war with the Spanish for a long time. But and so riding around on a bike I've been to Holland a couple times and riding around, especially like I rode from Rotterdam to Delft and got out into the farm country, you know, and was riding along the canals, you know, these little polders and stuff. And I don't know whether it was that I've looked at so much Dutch landscape painting that the landscape's familiar, or if it's some kind of ancestral memory thing or something. But there were there were bells ringing, you know, depending on how woo-woo I want to get about it. But it was a really interesting experience to be out there, and I couldn't tell. Like I really honestly just had no idea which one it was. I mean, is it just that you're so conscious of the huge space because it's flat, low-lying country with no obstructions, you know? You just have little windmills and trees, but, you know, just huge sky. It's like the Midwest here, you know? There's just not much. I don't know. That's interesting. I love that sense of place. That's become a really important thing in my work the past few years, you know? And it's not so much about... It's more of a felt sense of place, you know. It might be something about color or atmosphere, you know, the presence of a person, you know, like that figure painting, you know, or landscape. It's not really like it's particular, but it's not particular in it's descriptive more emotionally than it's descriptive literally, you know.
Yeah, that's what I get that from your work, because so much of your work is just implied through the layers of and shapes of colors on each other, and like you do some scraping out sometimes. That on Facebook the other day I was like that. I'm pretty sure I know that hill.
Oh yeah. I love that, and even more, I kind of love the fact that maybe it's not the hill. But like I got something about a hill in that area.
Yeah, exactly.
And that as a local, you dug. No, that's like as a landscape painter, I feel like, you know. And it's funny too, because like sometimes you'll see, like a painting of a person that you know, and you'll recognize them right away. It cracks me up. Like I was with my mom at the Legion of Honor. We were looking at one of those. You know, there's a crazy, I don't know who the painter was, but it's a Russian, like 19th century painter. There's some figures on a balcony. It's like a ceremony for a feast. There's a giant crowd in the courtyard. And like every head is just fully fleshed out.
Sure.
So my mom turns to me and she's like, hey, look, here's the same model here and here and here. And she started to pick apart
really?
His staging of the whole thing, which I thought was hilarious. So that's a different kind of particularity or likeness. But yeah, I love that. Like when I would post paintings of San Francisco and people would say, oh, that's my neighborhood. And then, I'd ask them where they lived. Like, no, it's not, but like, if the vibe feels right, then I feel like that's, and I get a lot of that, like when people leave California, they'll want to buy a painting or like, I get a lot of people buying my paintings because of that. And that to me is really, maybe that's close to why I paint, it's more or less that same kind of collector's impulse of just like greedy little piglet. Take it all home with me, like, ooh, that light.
Yeah, maybe. Like I have a painting by this artist, Ramon Hurtado. It's a really small piece, like, I don't know, 5x7 or maybe even smaller. And it's a painting that he did of LA. And it's not like I'm even like a big fan of Southern California in that way, but there's a particular quality that he captured in it. Like there, you can feel like the sort of the smogginess in the paint. It's just like this really sort of nondescript street. Could be any suburban area. But for me, I can look at it and be like, well, I don't even know if this happens consciously, but I can look at that painting and be like, well, what do I actually really like about that area? And what can I like inject into it in my observation of it and make it more, I guess, meaningful to myself. So I wonder if people can do that with your work of Oakland, because it does have that. Your work has this feeling of like, this is the East Bay. Like it just has that sort of thing you're capturing in it. And I wonder if people can do that same thing as collectors to your work in that way.
Yeah, I hope so. The one painting that I did sell after the show in Reading was to like, one of my friends growing up in San Jose. His father moved up to Ashland, Oregon, and lives up there now. So that's not such a far drive from Ashland to Reading.
No,
and
so it's like an hour
down,
and a half or so, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, about that. And he came down for the show, and he bought this painting that I did, which like it's literally like I went outside, went across the street, stood there under the train tracks, and painted this. It's like twilight with the big, it's just like twilight in a industrial neighborhood kind of painting. And Tom knew Oakland, and he loved it. And, that to me was just really, really flattering. And then it's really funny, too, that scene appealed to him because he's trained as a geologist, but he worked as a bus driver his whole life. His family were all like lefty, like labor organizers. And he's been very involved in labor organizing and unions all his life as an activist. And he worked as a bus driver in San Jose, in Santa Clara County. So there's a bus yard just right here.
Okay.
The Alameda County Transit buses all park right there. So it's just funny. I wonder if this is like, stirring something deep in Tom Fink about like rolling into the bus yard at 5:30 in the morning with his coffee.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe it is. This is one of the things that I think is really, really useful about painting. And, like I'm not one of those people that's going to tell you it's going to save the world in a big way, but like in little ways, like I think that sort of thing, right? Because just like we all have, our inner emotional life is so difficult to express and to share articulately,
right?
And our vision, if we think about like our memory and just kind of our sense of life, vision is just like such a critical part of like the narrative of who we are. And I think that everything, just the most mundane stuff that we look at, is so charged with meaning and subtle feeling because of that, because it's just such a constant, like, I don't know, I see so much that's so beautiful all the time. That I think any time that you see somebody pick some of that up simply and take it somewhere else, you just always respond to it. And so I think it deepens your palette of feelings, and like in a day and age where everything is super loud and screamy, yelly, misinformation,
right?
And, us and them and all of that kind of shit, I mean, I just think there's something really kind of revolutionary and just like the rich quietness of really looking. That's probably the meditator in me talking,
maybe.
But that part of painting is what really strikes me. And I think that if we, if we're looking for beer commercial happiness every day, you know what I mean? We're always going to be disappointed. But if like a quiet moment of light in the top of a tree is enough for you, you're going to be better off.
Right. Yeah.
I'm not saying that I'm always content, maybe there's a reason why I'm always trying to look for those things.
Yeah.
I mean, who can say? It's not that simple, but I do really think that there's something, artistically, that's like the hill I want to die on. I don't want to sacrifice that subtlety for some obvious topic sentence kind of emotion, The art that really impacts me, it gets me for its subtlety of feeling and observation, both about the world and our humanity in response to it.
It makes a lot of sense, especially when I think about the artists that you talk about that you're drawn to. There's this complexity of emotional range. Like, it's not just so in your face, like this is a happy painting or this is a sad painting. There's usually some bit of like it's almost like you need a paragraph to even try to attempt with words to explain the emotion that's happening.
A couple long German words.
Exactly.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that's interesting. Like, what does that mean as a culture that the Germans have lots of words for that sort of stuff. You know what I mean? Eskimos have lots of words for snow.
Yeah.
The French have lots of words for love and butter. Whatever. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, I think there's something similar to that. So I don't know whether, because I was inclined in that direction, like, my art has kind of gone from the dramatic. Like, I loved Goya and Munch and Kollwitz and, the angsty art, I was a punk rock teenager, and so it's really interesting to be like, to find myself shifting from like admiring, say, like, maybe admiring Matisse more than Goya on most days, or just in terms of like what I want to spend time with.
Right.
You know what I mean? Not saying that like, so yeah, maybe that's just me mellowing and becoming a little bit more, content with quiet things, or just realizing that like I'm not the one to make the great protest art. I hope somebody does. You know what I mean? Like somebody like Kollwitz or Goya, to me, like that art is eternal. It doesn't necessarily speak to great things about human nature, but like her capacity to. I don't know. Yeah, maybe the art does, because like, look at what she's done with all of this horror and suffering, and things like just the subjects that she would choose to draw. You know, prisoners listening to music, like, I don't know. There's a certain, I don't know. So anyway, like I've been pulled away from like that kind of more obvious narrative content to something that's much more quiet. Like you said, you couldn't even put a word on it with a paragraph, like that's what I find the most interesting, I think. And it's remarkable to me that people respond to it. I find that really heartening. Like some of the like paintings, there have been a few paintings the last few years that have been just like really soft, really quiet, just kind of like very oblique and abstract, and people have really responded to them, like really strongly. So it's encouraging, that there is, that. Like, you ever worry about that? Like, there's a great interview with Wayne Thiebaud, like, where you're concerned about your personal artistic interests. Like, you learn that you have to chase them no matter how weird or idiosyncratic they are at a certain point in your development. But he talks about that in an interview, that, like, he left his studio one night, and he's like, fuck, man, I'm painting pies. This is over. Like, nobody's going to take me seriously. You know what I mean?
Okay, yeah.
So, I mean, just... I think the point I'm trying to make is that I think it's easy for us to second guess what comes naturally to us.
Oh, yeah.
Artistically. Yeah. And so this is like the conception of like, what's your artistic voice? You know what I mean? Is that like your stage voice, the one that's practiced and has a range from here to here and can, you know what I mean? Or is that like my take on that is that your voice as an artist is more like the things that you can't help saying, the emotion that creeps into your voice, even though you're trying to keep it cool or whatever. You know what I mean? Like,
that's interesting. Yeah.
So it's that's a very introspective take on it, I suppose, but then
well, it makes
when
sense to
people
me,
respond to paintings that are leaning in that direction, the fact that a painter like Morandi is as famous as he is amazing to me.
Oh,
like quiet, wobbly, weird drawing.
yeah.
Like that's, there's something for everybody out there. I think that's something that's nice about today's art world. It might be confusing too because it's very hard to judge quality since nobody agrees. What's so apples and what's oranges anymore. I think that's the problem with the pluralism is it's just like such a free for all.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Two people who came up similarly, have the same schooling, hang out with each other, can disagree on how much they like, Sargent or Matisse or anybody like that. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Or even what's the point of painting? Or why is a quilt based on a heavy metal record in a museum? Or just like the contemporary art world is like so many different things at the same time now.
Yeah.
I feel like kind of a dinosaur, man, because really at the end of the day, I'm involved with pretty traditional painting stuff over here. And a lot of people are not. I guess the three of us represent like pretty different tendencies within relatively traditional training ourselves, right? Like,
yeah, I'd say so.
What are you most excited about? Like when you get out there and see art, like what have you guys seen recently that you've really loved?
Man, that's a good question.
I don't even want to try to restrict it to like living artists or dead artists or whatever. I mean, just whatever.
Well, there's always like little things that I'll pick up from shows. Like for example, the Monet show makes me want to really explore color a lot more. Just like I almost want to just like break it down in a way that makes sense for me personally, and try and figure out how I can incorporate some of those really complex color relationships in there. So I'm always looking at art in a little bit of an analytical mind like that.
Sure.
So there's things like that. But I mean, Alex Kanevsky is always doing something really interesting in my eyes. So that was a few months ago when he did that show. Oh wait, no, that was last year now at this point. Jeez.
Yeah, but like at the very end, November, December. Yeah. I just barely caught that one.
Oh, okay.
I really liked
I did
that
too.
show.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of what else I've come across. I mean, there's always something coming up in my Instagram feed that's worth looking at too. So it's hard to say any one particular or even group of particular things is really something I'm gravitating toward. I don't know how it is for you, Dan, because I mean, you just went to Japan, and I'm sure that there was a lot that you saw there that might have inspired you.
I bet.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is, like, so I went to Japan for 10 days, and it was like a mix of different things, like everything from like checking out museums. I got to check out a couple of like, I guess you could call them like interactive multimedia digital installation shows. Like,
wow, you had an experience and you don't even know what it was. You're like, took me to this place, man. I was in a truck, and
well, for example, like there's this. I guess it's put together by like this, I guess, collective called Team Lab, and it's so you pretty much just go to this space, and they have multiple rooms that are all kind of immersed with projected visuals.
Okay.
And I mean, it was pretty amazing in its own right, because it's like, I mean, like, I don't know, like for example, like one room you go in and it's dimly lit, so everything like, but all the walls are projected like these kind of rotating animated flower pieces that are like, apologize for like trying to kind of like work my way through the description, but like, so it's like, it's this animated flower projection, but they're all kind of like super saturated bright colors. And then they have also, aside from the blank walls, they also have like mirrors, so they kind of extend the room even further into like just this crazy space. And that's just like a couple of rooms, right? So that's just like one aspect. And then you go into another room and they'll have like kind of the same thing where it's like kind of animated projections, but definitely leaning on the artsy. But it's just interesting seeing what's possible with kind of like the digital medium and how it's the combination of space, interacting within that space, but using the means of technology. And just that whole experience alone was just like whoa. Like, I mean, it was one thing to witness, but also in terms of trying to think and break down like how something like that was even kind of put together. You know, it's just like, it's definitely like it's an experience in its own right that I kind of recommend to anyone. just to kind of go, because it's nothing, I can't really relate it to anything I've experienced ever before. You know, like
right, yeah, and I guess at its best, like, I mean, contemporary art can do that. Like, do you guys remember? God, have you ever seen? I remember seeing a Bill Viola show at MoMA years ago. He's a video artist.
Okay.
And so, like, each piece was probably, like, pretty much an immersive room like that. And, yeah, it's usually a projection as part of it. There's often a pretty intense sound component. But, yeah, talk about just, like, experiences that you just, I don't know. Yeah, I couldn't describe. And this, I think, goes on, you know. And so, honestly, yeah, probably there's tons of stuff that's way more interesting going on. And, like, yeah, where the sciences and technology and the arts overlap right now. All that whole interdisciplinary thing. I mean, I'm sure that there's lots of really fascinating stuff going on there.
Yeah.
Man, I'm just going to paint.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I'm not to say that stuff doesn't have any value. It's just that's how into painting I am.
I know.
I'm just an obsessive person, man. I'm just like, I just have this, like, you know, like, I got it. It's been crazy. Like, I got that award to go to Italy, which super exciting. Like, I had applied last year and almost gotten the scholarship. So I'm gonna be out there for like 6 weeks, but I didn't know whether I was gonna get the scholarship or not. I was gonna hold on to my job. I got laid off from my job like 2 months ago. 7 years I worked there. The last few years, like 30 hours a week. You know, no notice. Not even 2 weeks, none of that, just you're done. And, like, ever since then, it's been so crazy because I've been, like, just wanting to, what if I could have a month in my own studio? You know what I mean? Could I apply for a residency in my own life where I don't have to go and, you know, work for other people?
Yeah.
And so it's been really hard to tear myself away from the fact that I can attend to my artistic life at any time.
Yeah.
Stay up late tonight working. I don't have to think about table saw at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. You know what I mean? Like,
that's like the most liberating like feeling to get to that point where
it's like, great. It's just that I worry about my obsessive character, you know, because there are like, you know, lights have to, you know what I mean? The bills have to be paid, and you know, all of that kind of stuff. I worry about like the practical side of things a little bit, but that's only because my thrill at being able to be here completely immersed in all of it now, you know, especially because it built up to a certain point, because now for the last few years I have been showing again. I've got things coming up that I'm excited about, you know, and so there's just all this other stuff feeding into it, you know. It's just it's been really kind of exhilarating to wake up and be like, you can do whatever you want today, you know. Because I was just so used to working 7 days a week, man. You know, get up at 5:30 in the morning to like do office stuff before I go to work, then go to work a 10-hour day, come back, walk the dogs, maybe cook, maybe do yoga, but I'm definitely not painting on a work day. But that was nice because then I was able to I had a 4-hour chunk, you know, a 4-day chunk, you know, Monday or Friday through Monday every week, that I could be in the studio for 3 days straight without interruptions if I wanted. And somehow, I don't know how it is for you guys, but like I do my best work when I feel like, you know, like I could be in this bunker for 2 weeks. And, you know, like I need to feel like I have all the time in the world, kind of. Yeah. You know, or I know that I do my best work from that place. And it's really, you know, there's part of me that feels like that's diva-like, you know, like, I can't work under these conditions kind of thing. You know?
I relate to that in a bit.
Yeah, and, you know, so that makes it, you know, I mean, you want to have a sustained focus in your work, you know, but by the same token, if the thoughts about just navigating the hustle and the financial chaos are such that you can't, you know what I mean? You need a certain, I don't buy that romantic shit about starving and sweating it out. I mean, we all suffer through enough financial instability, just as normal humans these days, much less creative, artistic ones with unconventional careers. You know, I don't buy that. That like, yeah, sure, a little fear will put an edge into your work, you know, like you're hungry, you know, you might give a convincing performance, but I think to do really good work, you need to be in a position where you're able to take care of yourself.
Yeah,
know?
I agree.
And I think that that's challenging here, and I think that's the thing that'll push me out of California, you know? It's because financially I cannot buy enough time to exist in this place.
No,
you know, and only because I'm willing to go to war with my landlord over this place and just live like that. It's the only reason I have affordable rent, you know. And anybody that I know that's not paying these insane rents has something like that, or they have owned their property for a long time. You know, I mean, I've seen that make the critical difference again and again. You know, as a younger artist, if I had had that mentality to buy property and know how to do the work on it myself, and like, you know, because I've seen a lot of artists make that a really viable thing where they're able to like, and then it can become a community thing. Like my friends, Andy and Laurel, who I rented my studio from for years, you know, they have a place in the Mission, you know, that they bought with some friends. And the friends look good on paper to banks, you know, they have good jobs. And then Andy and Laurel have all the ability to do any kind of work on the place that it needs, you know. And so they did that in the Mission, and then they did it up north at their place out in Sebastopol. And so in both places they rent, and so they renovate spaces and rent studios to artists.
Oh, okay.
They're not trying to be residential landlords so much, but just, you know, commercial landlords for studio space. And it's worked out
that's cool.
really well for them. And I've seen that time and time again be the factor that's allowed artists to be able to make the space, you know? Because it's like one thing, like I'm feeling really plugged into the creative side of my work. Like I'm not... you know, casting about for inspiration. Like I feel really clear, like there's just so much work that I want to do, but then it's like the part I'm trying to figure out is like the, you know, just that part, like how do I continue to carve out an affordable, sustainable life? And step one is leave California, man. I mean, I grew up here, but it's like, you know,
the reality's right there staring at you in the face.
Oh, and it has been for years. And, you know, it kills me to realize how hopeless it's made me over the years, you know, that like how like modest I've kept my dreams because I'm just so used to it takes a lot to keep your nose above water here. You don't spend a lot of time contemplating the horizon, you know? So that's interesting to think about. I think for me, the thing that pins it down is like teaching, you know, if I can switch out the woodworking and get back to teaching, like I feel really inspired about teaching. I feel like I've got so much back from my students just in the few workshops that I've taught this year. I just think it's really a natural thing for me to do. And it's very intimately related to my art, and I'll go wherever that takes me. And I mean, I can see myself equally likely living somewhere out in the woods on the East Coast, you know? Or like I could see ending up in like Philadelphia for a while, somewhere around there. You know, a lot of great artists.
Right.
6 hours by train from my family in Boston. I get to New York or DC or Baltimore in like 2 hours. Yeah. I don't know what I'm gonna do when I get that like Yosemite feeling, you know.
Oh, sure.
But I guess I'll just go to Maine or New Hampshire or Vermont. Or,
there you go. Yeah,
there's plenty of beautiful places.
I wanted to switch gears real quick. I guess because we're getting close to the end. But you actually brought up something interesting. You said about like having your dreams sort of modest, and it kind of brings into one of the questions I asked at the end is what artists would do with David Cho money. It's kind of the nickname I gave to the thing, but it's like, you know, $200 million to like fulfill your artistic dream. So like, is there anything that you have in mind that you're like, I can't do it right now just because I don't have the money or anything like that?
No, man, I make little, quiet, modest paintings. I have everything I need here in this room right now to make paintings for like a year. You could just cut me off from the world, you know. No, not at all. I totally don't think of that scale. It's fascinating to think about. I mean, I almost like... So where does this, like, this is just money that fell in your lap that you could...
Yeah, like for, I don't know, like for him, the money more or less fell into his lap by not by happenstance, but he just like happened to roll the dice and it paid off for him. But I mean, I guess then not even art thing, like what would you do if you happen to have that money? What would you do with it?
Yeah, I guess that's a question, you know. I mean, I think that was what I was wondering is like, is this a question about grandiose art projects, or is it
that's what I'm more
like philanthropy or whatever, you know, or social conscience?
For me, I'm more interested in hearing about the art thing because, it's just more like those sort of things that, you know, you get into your daydreams and think like, well, what can't I do right now that I wish I was doing if I had more money? So I'm always interested in hearing what other people have. But if it's not an art thing, then yeah, definitely. Like, I'm still curious about, because I mean, we've heard from doing the podcast all sorts of different answers to that.
Yeah, no, I'm really curious. I mean, so for me, it's like I would really, so my knee-jerk response is just that's time. I've just bought myself as much time as I need to have that all the time, and the, you know, the freedom to explore what I want to in my work. But I think that would still probably be but then you ask yourself, you know, like I don't know, one of the first things that came to mind too is like, oh, okay, if you have a huge budget and that means a commensurately large project, I mean, then what is, then it begs the question, does that need to become social or political? Should it? Like, I'm not usually the most didactic person, and I don't feel like yelling at anybody changes opinions much. But
Sure.
Like, I haven't seen Ai Weiwei's movie about human migration, but I start to ask myself, like, yeah, maybe, you know, like, if then we're going to make artistic projects, you know, shouldn't they grapple with, like, I mean... Yeah, the great issues of our times, maybe, you know, pollution, the environment, sort of, just the sort of materialistic, capitalistic kind of, you know, just, I don't know. I mean, I think maybe there's, so naturally, and you might not guess that since my work is so kind of personal, you know, that I would go someplace social or political. But there's something about the thought of a giant stack of money. I mean, like, yes, like public art projects, right? Have you been to Denver?
I have a long time ago, but yeah.
This is a weird blue horse at the airport. I mean, this is just kind of like a weird whatever public art story, right? It's just a weird blue horse. It's super garish. Like, it's standing on its back legs. It's painted like primary blue. It's got bright orange mane.
Oh, okay.
Its eyes flash red. It's like this lurid comic book thing.
Yeah.
You know... versus like a Maya Lin high-minded conception of public art, you know, which I think her work is really beautiful, really brilliant. Like, I don't, you know, but regardless to say, that's like, I feel like that would be a totally different artist than the artist that I presently am. I don't, I really kind of keep things at the personal, introspective level, and hopefully that goes somewhere fairly universal, whether it's talking about things like memory or sense of place or, you know, like just, I don't have a grandiose ambition. I don't know what I would do with like an Anselm Kiefer size studio, or that's really far away from what I'm thinking about artistically.
Right. Yeah.
To the point where I don't even have an idea.
Yeah. It just the different types of answers we've gotten from it makes me wonder if artists sort of almost fit themselves into the psychic space of what they can afford to take up, I guess.
Oh, yeah. I see what you mean. I mean. Yeah, it's a complicated question. I don't have the answers. So, I think it's interesting that I'm sure that answers to all that are really different. But I do think that it's not like, I'm not making small, modest, quiet paintings only because I don't have a lot of money or can't afford bright colors.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like, there's a value statement in there as well. That's kind of its own thing. It's interesting. Like, I have these paintings, but I have these paintings that are like really, really crusty. They become landscapey, but they're
all right. Yeah.
They're very painterly, very abstract. I think that this group that I'm finding here are especially crusty. But I got into a debate with a crusty person on Facebook, which sometimes happens. You know, this guy's a painter, and like we had some mutual friends or whatever. And
it was fate that he gave you the number 43 one.
Right?
No, that's just my artist.
I know. It's funny coincidence. That's just what happened to be there. But I had this guy crawl up my butt about how these were lame because they were small scale. That like if this was an 8 foot wide painting,
sure,
that's got commitment, that's got balls, you know. But this is, and I was like, number one, very convenient for you to be talking about my commitment. Fuck you know about that, you know. But you know, whatever. That was his perspective.
Oh, these are rad. I like these a lot, though.
Yeah, for me, and there's another one over there that got like has like really some pretty spatial, traditional landscapey moments in it. And I think so. You know, I think one of this guy's arguments would have been, well, you're just cleaning your palette. You're just smearing around paint. You know, it's like the kind of traditional representational artist's critique of abstraction. You know, that's
okay.
It's all. You know, it's all making a mess with your Play-Doh. It's all material and no intention and all of that kind of thing. But, you know, more than that, I can see what the guy was saying. Like, yeah, these could be pretty compelling paintings if they were giant.
Yeah.
But, like, we live in a world that's Jumbotron everything.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of disgusts me. I feel like we have enough of that. I want something that's got some quiet, human, introspective scale to it. I feel like we're, you know, losing our literacy at smaller emotions and just becoming like, you know what I mean? Everything's all caps all the time. Like, I just don't buy it.
Yeah.
Like, not to say I wouldn't love to, like, if I had an Anselm Kiefer painting, Anselm Kiefer size studio and some canvases like that, you know, maybe I would do paintings like that and love it. I'm not saying I'm opposed necessarily. I just haven't even considered lately what my relationship to such a thing might be.
Right.
So some of that does come from practical things. But that's also not like a direction that I've been interested in exploring for that like sort of broader reason.
Right, I see.
But even that statement's a kind of a funny statement too, because it's like you could apply that same statement to really kind of most paintings or in general.
What do you mean?
Well, the idea of like, oh yeah, if that was bigger or if that was like like a 5 foot painting. I mean, like that's actually one thing that I actually kind of find interesting about going to like say art markets or is the two things that's always kind of a guarantee is a really big version of something that normally isn't big. Like that's just like a guarantee I'm going to see some aspect of that in the show. Right. And then the other is abundance of whatever item. So you take like, I don't know, I mean, I'm just going off the top, but you get a beer can, but if you have 100 beer cans in a circle, all of a sudden it's more than just like that one whatever, right? Like it turns into like an installation in its own right.
Yeah.
But to kind of increase the scale to like a sketchbook drawing or whatever, of course it's going to come and make a certain, I mean, just like I said, scale has its own impact in its own right. So
right, exactly.
It's, I don't know. I mean, there's just something about that statement that's just kind of like, well, that's kind of like a given. Like,
Well, so for instance, what do you think about like the David Hockney show at the De Young? Like, did you see that? It was a while ago now, maybe 5 years ago or something.
I didn't see it, but David Hockney is one of my least favorite artists, really.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I saw that look come across your face.
You said least favorite?
Yeah. I'm not a Hockney fan. I just don't. I mean, he's not the worst painter or artist by any means.
He's not the worst.
Yeah, but I just don't like his ideas about art, really.
Okay.
He doesn't really. His arguments don't make.
Wait,
sense
are you responding to
Like his book about the old masters? Or
that one for sure is annoys me to no end. But just
I'm
sure. Maybe it's not even his fault, but just like the importance they put on his work, like the whole like iPad drawing thing.
That's actually exactly why I brought it up.
Okay,
is because that show. I mean, this was one of the things with that show. It was called something like An Unreasonably Big Exhibition or some shit like that, right? So they were aware that it was very maximalist. Which is its own thing. And so then, you combine that with like Hockney's color palette and his sort of like almost childlike directness, which I actually admire the fact that he's so like, he's managed to spit out most of his formal training somehow, and like really, like that famous Picasso thing about we spend so much time trying to learn to paint like a child again.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think Hockney's pretty successful at that. Like he keeps his adult, like really educated mind and is still really playful. Yeah, the historical importance he's given. But the reason I bring it up is because of the iPad drawings in that. That to me was like, I don't care if you draw on your iPad, that's cool. But like, for instance, I think of something like someone like Mark Nelson and the drawings that he can do digitally, or any other like Coro, anybody that has a fluency. You, I'm sure, could do great. I mean, I don't know if you do digital stuff, but your sensibility would lend itself well to it. Regardless, the novelty of the fact that it's a fucking iPad drawing is not enough. It's not interesting, in my opinion, And then when you take the fact that you don't understand screen resolution or whatever, you print the thing. It was, they printed them like 10 feet wide and 20 feet tall. So on top of it being like a so-so iPad drawing of Yosemite, it's also printed like 9 times too large. So it looks all pixelated and weird. And like, I think it's really interesting the way that he's playing with stuff. But like, so... Again, it's the scale thing, and I think that, I mean, I think it's interesting. I think it definitely has its own inherent emotive power.
Yeah, for sure.
Imagine, Richard Serra got 0 public commissions with like little scale models, I'm sure, right? Like, I don't know how he sold those things, but it's like the physical presence that does it. At the end of the day, though, I feel like that's just like this, this fucking thing where people, excuse me, this is the part of the conversation where I start to swear now because we're talking about these kinds of things, where it becomes I'm an artist making art with a capital A, for important viewers also with capitals, it just feels to me like the price of admission to ego land for everything to have to be that big. I understand that like on some level, maybe at one point doing a big painting was a critique of bougie values and, little precious, still lifes in picture frames, rich guy aesthetics, but by now, like a big painting is, it's just the splashy, there's a lot of people out there.
It's almost really reverse now. Yeah.
Right. Like there's a lot of people that are really adept at making really big paintings that are maybe formally very beautiful, but don't say a lot, you know?
Sure.
But then you have somebody like Anselm Kiefer or Jenny Saville, there are people that use scale, Lucian Freud was a figurative painter who absolutely used scale to a really effective, but yeah, I have no idea, man. My guess is I would probably continue to make paintings and then do something weird like that guy that built that Love Mountain or whatever down in the desert,
Sure.
Yeah. I would probably like just make more of my paintings and then make some kind of weird outsider monument. Like me and the dogs would figure it out.
Right on, yeah. You make your own Burning Man or something.
Something. Yeah. No, I really don't know. I would just totally use that to buy a piece of land that I could hang out and build a nice studio on and make as many paintings as I could.
Nice.
Have cool people over to eat good meals.
Right on.
It's kind of funny too with that question about the money, because it's like, it's interesting even like how you were kind of asking questions back to that question, because it's like it's kind of hard to separate the first thing that comes to mind as far as like being grandiose, like doing something grandiose with that money, because it's just like a lump sum of money. So it's like, so what are you going to do with that money, right? So it's kind of like,
right.
It's like, wait a second, like, does that make you change as an artist just because you're like,
right?
Oh, I could actually afford like these these big art installations now. So like,
yeah,
but are you that type of artist even to begin with? So
well, that's why like sort of musing out loud. Like, would it change, and why? But yeah, I mean, it's hard to know without.
Supposedly, that's the story with Frank Auerbach, is that he like lived on a shoestring for so long that by the time he finally did get money, it didn't change his lifestyle at all, because he totally figured out a lifestyle that worked for him with the very limited means that he had. And it was fairly monastic, but it made him happy enough. You know? I mean, maybe my shit was totally knee jerk, and it's just because I was like immediately like, oh damn, do most people have like a big, you know what I mean? Like, here's my big idea. Let me trot this out.
No,
like,
actually,
I got nothing. Dude.
Most artists we ask don't. Like, they usually tend to go like more toward the philanthropic answer to that.
Well, because for one thing, if you got some other big idea, right? Like, I assume that we don't all have unlimited time to make art. So by and large, if you are an artist and you're making art regularly, you're getting close to what it is, or at least trying, right, to make the art that you want to make.
Yeah, I would.
You know, I guess if you're, you know, a person that conceives more of, I guess there's a lot of project funding out there. If you wanted to write grants and stuff, there's a lot of project-based grants out there for weird, heady, conceptual stuff. Based on what I can tell, you know, I see it out there, and it doesn't look like it was cheap to make.
Right.
You know. I think for me, that's part of it too, you know, is there's a certain, I remember that, like, going to, like, what is it that makes, there's something I find off-putting a lot of times when I go to contemporary art museums, and I think it is partially to do with that thing about the idea being more important than the object, although that doesn't bother me necessarily, although I'm admittedly an object and craft-oriented person also. Ideally, they should be 50-50. They should be hand and glove, you know, poem and word, you know, like sum and parts, you know. It shouldn't be something that you can separate, but there's a certain, like the combination of cerebral headiness of a lot of contemporary art in museums combined with its like giant production budget seems really entitled to me, man. Like, it seems really removed from like just the normal concerns of normal people to me. And I realize that not everybody's interested in like navel gazing at some flowers in the soft light of my studio either. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, I'm not saying, but you know, like that to me, it just doesn't have, like, at the end of the day, like, art for me is about like profound, like personal human experience, big questions kind of stuff. You know, what gives you joy? What makes you feel despair? You know what I mean? Like, I had a sketchbook where I wrote a bunch of questions to myself once, and one of them was like, if you had to paint one painting over and over again forever, what would it be?
Oh, wow. That's a really interesting question.
yeah. Or and then I think I had an opposite one, and I'm trying to remember what it was. Something along the lines of like, you know, if you had to always paint something different, how would you handle that, or whatever? Or just trying to figure out what my interest was. You know what I mean? Like, if I could boil it down to one thing, you know what I mean? Because I get those questions a lot, maybe less so lately. But like, I would get the, you know, are you a figure painter? Are you a landscape painter? You know, do you do colorful paintings? Do you do gray paintings? You know what I mean? Like,
like other people asking you that, or
okay, yeah, and I just say yes, yes,
right.
You know, but I find it interesting to ask those kinds of questions, and I guess when it comes down to it, for me, it's just like the light and the experience of being here. You know, the moment. You know, so there's the light, literally, like, it's fascinating, like how it's different everywhere you go. But then there's light has a long history of, I don't have a particularly religious upbringing, but even without the specific religious symbolism and metaphor and connotation, I mean, light is literally, you know, the source of all life, you know, like it's photosynthesis, you know. So there's something about it that I see, you know, just that it moves me deeply, and, you know, painting seems to get me to where I'm able to talk about some of it a little bit, because verbally you just can't get very far. And so that, you know, I guess, you know, I was talking to an artist in Philadelphia whose family, she has a brother who's a filmmaker. Her father was an architect. She's a portrait painter. And she was talking about how everyone in her family, like, couldn't, like their art form was so profoundly bound up with who they were. Like the fact that one chose to make films. And,
okay.
You know what I'm saying? Like there's something that you gravitate naturally towards, you know? And I think it's a shame when people second guess that. It's really easy to do for 1,000 obvious reasons. But, you know, it's like, imagine if B.B. King had spent his life trying to play trumpet instead. Wasn't very good at it, or
sure.
You know what I mean? This is my wind up for why I'm still a painter, why I'm still a dinosaur. You know?
I know.
Because this is the stuff that speaks to me. This is where I feel like I can be more eloquent than I can in any other way. And so I have to roll with it, whether it's fashionable or not. Again, it's kind of a personal need, and then the need to find a way to navigate a way to make a living from it comes from that. But I'm pretty sure that I would still paint even if nobody wanted to show them and no one wanted to buy them. And you know, it's just a part of how I relate to the world.
Yeah, definitely.
You know?
Well, cheers to that, though. I mean, like you found it. You know, you found your thing that
Man, I am so grateful for that. I really am. Like, I'm so grateful for that.
Yeah, because, I mean, it keeps the... I mean, yeah, the fact that you have it kind of helps keep the focus versus, like, I feel like in my position, as far as, like, my range of interests, I can't help but dabble in all these different things. But I also enjoy the range.
Yeah.
So it's, you know, there's moments where it's like, it's definitely fun, but there's other moments where I'm like, oh man, I could only juggle so much, you know, but to kind of have your thing where it's like, all right, I found it. I'm going to work on it, you know, like that's great.
Yeah. No, it feels good. And it feels really good the last few years to feel like I'm starting to find other people, that are, you know, doing work that's engaged with the same sort of stuff, and you know that there's kind of a conversation happening around what we're doing and inspiring each other, and kind of, you know, that's really and that's another way I feel like, you know, that's one way, you know, you've got the proper shoes on, you know, as you keep bumping into the right people. You know, it feeds you little.
Yeah, I think that just takes
things,
time to get to
it
that
does.
point. Yeah.
Yeah, it does, and who knows? It'll change again. You know, I'm definitely. I've gone through long periods where I felt very blocked. You know, and that's probably to do just as well with my general health. Like I've always had problems with depression, and so you know, I think the two things are linked up, but I don't have a way to tell that story where it doesn't become like a. You know, people are just still so, it's such a cartoony story, you know, artist struggles for their mental health, but yet, like there's something important in there that I want to talk about, but I guess, you know, for now I would just say that painting for me initially was a way of like sharing the pain or fear,
okay.
You know, and now it's a way of sharing the joy and wonder at being here, hopefully, you know, and not that's exclusively, awesome. You know, but I think that's, you know, according to my needs at the time, you know, and then as I grew as a person and my circumstances changed for the better, you know, then I'm more able to, you know, so, you know, I think, you can make as much or as little of an artistic practice as you want, I think, you know, and, commercial success is just one part of it, but for me, you know, it's given me a whole new relationship to life, you know, completely. You know, it's a form of reverence, honestly, and I think that's why I go back to the visible world again and again, is in reverence. You know, so it's not about like that's a correct way to paint. Abstract painting over there isn't good. You know, it's like can I make a landscape that gives me the same feeling as a Rothko or whatever?
Yeah.
You know, it's all about that authenticity of experience and feeling for me. So I don't get too deep into the theory and the heady stuff. I know, you know, a lot of people love that stuff. It's great. If that's what does it for you. But for me, it's like can I say something that I couldn't say any other way?
Right, you right, know? Yeah.
It's not always a pleasant thing, you know, to be in that position of needing to find some way. But I think it's one of the factors that drives great art. You know, there's a great James Baldwin book. I can't remember which one it is, but one of the characters is a junkie, and his brother's talking about how his brother is like, it's set in New York, and he's like, he developed the habit because he was pouring all of his emotional life. He developed the heroin habit to face the terror of pouring his heart and soul into an inanimate object. You know,
wow.
Piano becoming like his repository for all of his everything that he couldn't be in life, or all the, you know, like all the, you know, just all the, just pouring his heart and soul into. Try doing that with a person. It doesn't go much better. You know what I mean? With an instrument or a paintbrush or whatever. Like let me put it this way: all your eggs in one basket is bound to spell trouble.
Right.
But I love that we can all take something away, you know, from other people's experience through the arts. That to me is the thing that makes it all worth it. It makes me realize, you know, just how deep what we all have in common is. You know.
Yeah.
That shared humanity.
So one of the harder questions that we asked artists, but who are your top 5 living artists right now?
Wow. Yeah, my top 5 living artists. Okay, so Antonio Lopez Garcia. I'm just gonna get the low-hanging fruit
for sure. Yeah,
because it's there.
Oh yeah.
Gosh,
he's such a big influence on.
It gets a lot harder from there.
Yeah,
especially when you restrict it to living artists.
Yeah, well,
it's not because there's not enough of them. It's because it's so much harder to choose.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like from antiquity, or even meaning just 100 years ago, I've kind of cherry picked.
Yeah.
What I already love.
Well, maybe just the first 5 that come to mind.
Well, you know, I'm just gonna talk about people that I have in my collection, just because the first things to come to mind, and they're, you know, like daily influences. So like, there's Martin Campos.
Yeah, he's awesome.
Painting is up there. He's a favorite. Kanevsky hanging next to him is definitely a person whose influence is hard to escape, I think.
Yeah.
Fantastic painter for sure. Jennifer Paczynski is an amazing painter whose work I really like. She's in Sacramento. Also shows at Dolby Chadwick. Her work's fantastic. Really, I'm
sure I've seen
really
it before.
Strong and gestural, forceful. A lot of she lived in London for a while, so I think maybe she picked up some of that British figurative painting intensity over there. My friend Heidi McDowell, who just had a show in San Francisco. I really love her work.
Let's see, is that 4?
Yeah, that's 4. And then the last one I'll throw out there is my friend Mia Ando, who's in New York now.
Okay.
And she does a lot more installations and stuff these days, but still does paintings on metal. She does these really reductive, almost like color fieldy kind of things. Her work's really meditative and big influence on me. But those are the first 5 to come to mind, and I have a real hard time making it short, you know.
Yeah.
I'm kind of in love with dozens of artists.
I know.
You know? It's like I totally have artist crushes, you know.
It's kind of a terrible question to ask artists, but I just like to hear the answers.
No, I mean, I think for everyone, I assume that it's the struggle to narrow it down.
Right, exactly, yeah.
You know, that's what's really hard is, like, it's almost like if you could be like, who are your 5 favorite figure painters or landscape painters, that would be so much easier.
Right.
But like, if it's just 5 contemporary painters, like, man, that's a wide net. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because there's different categories.
Which I think goes to show you how much as painters, you know, we're like creatures of tradition and context, you know. Like, I remember talking to someone who said he had studied at the Art Institute, and he was like, how do you paint anything? It's all been done before, figures, still life, portraits. I'm like, yeah, well, I mean, like, people have put...
It's kind of been done, but not.
Like, I thought so, too, but it was like, he's a smart dude in other ways, and he's dyslexic. Okay. And he had this highfalutin conceptual art education, so in some ways it was interesting, because it was like having a parrot be like, what'd they tell you in art class today? Like, what's their... But I was like, God, so you got to be a genius, man. You got to completely reinvent the wheel to make one good piece. Whereas all I got to do is wake up in the morning and think of 6 painters whose work I love, and I'm like, off for a day's work.
Exactly.
I don't even want to stop to eat lunch.
Yeah.
That to me, it's an endless well of inspiration. And that's a point that I try to drive home to students, is that, like, as much as we're students of nature, we learn how to make paintings by looking at great paintings, so feed yourself appropriately, like, look at great work.
Yeah, I think for the most part, it's an impossible burden to put on yourself to reinvent the wheel every time.
I think I'd go further than that and say that's a form of psychosis, but
yeah, maybe.
But heavy burden, to say the least.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so that's 5 favorite painters.
Josh's favorite question to ask artists is, are there any artists who you hate?
Sure. I mean, I'm pretty predictable there. Like, give me 5 minutes in a room with Jeff Koons, and, like, I mean, yeah. So again, are we living or dead?
It doesn't matter. That one, you can protect your reputation if you want.
Yeah, no, like, I don't have any personal beef I'd like to announce right
Sure.
Anyway,
it's more of a thing like
so again, like, if Jeff Koons was my weird neighbor, I'd probably think he was fucking brilliant, right? Like, I don't think something has to do with his station in the larger art world,
right?
For me to feel that way about him. But there is a lot in his work that I find offensive, genuinely, like antithetical to the values that I was talking about earlier. And very much like, I mean, that's his thing. That's what he's trying to say. Like Damien Hirst, Jeff Koons, that whole crowd. But again, that's low-hanging fruit.
I mean, those are usually the easiest. What I've found usually is that if there's an artist whose work I don't really care for, I just kind of ignore it. So it's hard for it to stay.
That's exactly, because what I was going to come around to is that if there's enough in their work for me to hate it, they've done something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so genuinely, it's like a difference of perspective, or a difference of aesthetics, or a difference of values. But at the end of the day, like, like, I heard about, there's some artist, a contemporary artist from LA, and I can't remember the name, Christian somebody. Okay, but his deal was, you might have heard that, like, in year 1 or 2 of talking about the wall, Trump, like, he had a contractor that was down on the border, and they were laying out samples, basically, of like prototypes. Like, oh, we're going to build this wall. This one is X dollars per square foot. Prototype B is, this price per square foot, or square, linear mile, or whatever it is. And so there was this LA conceptual artist there's a spot in Tijuana that you could see these prototypes from. And this guy was taking people down there on a tour and saying that the whole thing was his conceptual artwork. Which, like, I don't know. Like, I'm not sure. Maybe I didn't read the argument carefully enough. But there was this whole thing that, again, it had more to do with my dislike of the art world.
Okay.
And of the social and political situation in our country, and the overlap of those things, than I really, like... I don't even know if it had any merits as art. So I feel like the people as artists that I dislike are the people that are disingenuous.
Yeah.
And so it's people like Jeff Koons, or Damien Hirst, or like I'm not up enough on, like, who, like, the big, like, graffiti art stars are. I tried to remember, Brett was telling me there's one guy that he almost got in a fight with at Art Miami. It was really, like, you got to try pretty hard to get in a fight with Brett. Like,
shit.
Basically, like, just picking a fight.
Yeah, totally.
So it's like, that's what I don't like. I don't like fakeness.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like, if you bring something that can make me feel something real. But like, I don't like a lot of this
reaction.
So it's like a lot of like I think that I hate Duchamp and Warhol, But then I think about it a little more, and I don't think I hate them really all that much. Although, like, you know, Andy Warhol's pretty vapid. Like, there's not that much to. It's more that I hate what's been made of the trails they blazed since.
I think that's,
you know what I mean. Like, I hate their grumpy little grandchildren. You know, like those guys are all right.
Exactly.
You know, they were weirdos who were making some jokes. You know,
right? Exactly.
And I think there's lots of space for that too. So I can't lose perspective from the fact that, you know, like my take, like I was saying, you know, my art comes from personal need. The art I respond to comes from personal need. And I can't necessarily project that system of values onto other people for whom it's, you know, cultural or literary swordplay to make a conceptual work of art. Like, I mean, that's fine. You know, you can unpack that. But, like, at the end of the day, I'm not saying we all need to be Diego Rivera either, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I just think, you know, I know what I respond to.
Yeah.
And that's what's important for me. But I do think that, you know, the arts could certainly, like, you know, why doesn't art have greater primacy and relevance in American culture? Why is, you know, someone like Beyonce is, like, among the most famous artists that we have. And God, look how much it upset people when she actually said a few things, you know? Like, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think we're still so far from having a culture that can even look itself in the face, much less, like, have a nuanced conversation about it, that I think a lot of the art that I hate is kind of like, you saw The Price of Everything?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of that conversation. That movie's a little heartbreaking in the sense that, like, it's exactly what you expect to see. But if you've been in the art world long enough, you can read between the lines of what the artists don't say. You know what I mean? When they're talking about auction houses and markets and dealers and stuff, there's like...
Oh, yeah. Well, there was that one lady, was she an African artist? Like, I feel like she spoke volumes when she wasn't saying anything in that part.
Yeah, because they were talking about how much her work was valued now.
Yeah.
And she's a really awesome artist. Yeah, she's Nigerian and living in LA, maybe.
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
So Martin knows her. She studied.
Oh, really?
She studied at PAFA, yeah. I think that she was one of his students at one point, and we talked a little bit about... He says she's as legit as they come, too. And so, you know, I mean, yeah, there have been plenty of great artists who have been handed the keys to the kingdom. You know what I mean? Like Lucian Freud had the... And I mean, think about how weird and uncomfortable his work is for a minute. You know what I mean? Like, but yet in Britain, you know, it's a stuffy country, at least in some respects, traditionally, you know, they gave him the keys to, like, he could go to the National Gallery in the middle of the night and look at Velázquez.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's crazy. Like, I don't think America even respects the arts that much yet. Like, as a whole, there are little pockets.
Yeah, there's pockets, but I feel like it's more of a... I mean, I don't know. It's like... Yeah, I don't know. That's kind of loaded.
Art that I hate, Black Mirror. Black Mirror upsets the living shit out of me. I find Black Mirror really disturbing. And that's just me not wanting to be disturbed. So I think those guys are brilliant. I've only seen one episode, and I'm like, oh, my mind does not need any encouragement in this direction. No. This is gonna be bad. Like,
I get that. The last thing we do is I call it the hot seat, but it's I have a list of 10 artists, and you just give your snap judgment. Just either a one word or a quick little sentence about what you think about their work. So it's all famous artists. So first one is Rembrandt.
Hell yes.
Hell yes.
Yeah. A meaty, heavy hell yes.
Nice.
Late Rembrandt especially, but all of it.
For sure. John Singer Sargent.
Just starting to appreciate him again. Brilliant painter, brilliant technician. I just went to school with too many people that admired him.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, his sense of color, his draftsmanship is impeccable. You know, like, who else could make those, like, those watercolors of just looking up a hillside of rocks? It's just a pile of boulders. These are some of the best paintings I've ever seen.
Right, exactly.
He's pretty amazing, for sure, but not someone I think about a lot these days either.
Yeah, you know? I think people go through, especially Academy of Art graduates.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
Like, I felt allergic for a long time. So he was very important in turning me off to a lot of things that probably would have otherwise occupied me for a long time. You know?
Interesting.
But now I can see, like, Sorolla or Sargent or Zorn and love it, you know?
For sure. Next one, Van Gogh.
Love him. He's not just because he and I look a little bit alike. I've gotten that a few times over the years, but no, he's
funny.
He was very influential when I was younger, and I still really absolutely love his work. I mean, he just both for its inventiveness and also for just his vulnerability and sort of intensity that he approached the whole thing with. And I have a big book of his letters that's fantastic.
Oh, sure.
So yeah, I love him, and I think people make too much of a cartoon of him too frequently. I mean, he had issues.
That's true.
But I think he was a much more intelligent and lucid guy, much more of the time than people give him credit for. I want to see the new movie with Willem Dafoe, but I haven't yet. I tend to shy away from those things because it's usually the artist that's a train wreck, and it's just kind of like.
It's entertainment at that point, It's just
right, exactly, and I think it doesn't do anything good to give young artists role models for what they can be,
That's a good point. Yeah. Next one, Dali.
That's great for teenagers and mushrooms, man.
Yeah. That is such that tends to be what people boil him down to.
and again, that sounds pretty dismissive. He was a pretty amazing artist. He was a pretty amazing character. But that guy walked around with an anteater. Just for that, I'll give him love. He would walk around with an anteater and throw it at people. There's a famous French movie where he does that. He walks onto the set with an anteater and just throws it to somebody. It was part of that cinema verite where they're trying to improvise.
Yeah.
And, he was somebody's friend. I can't remember the movie, but it's a famous,
Well, Adam Caldwell told me a story last week about his, I think his grandpa met him once at a show, and he was walking around with a sea urchin and painting with it at the art show. So it seems like that's kind of.
So I feel like I love him as a person more than I like his art. Although I think he was really talented and did some amazing things. There are some Dali paintings I can't figure out. There's one. It's like a window, and it's called it's like window that turns into a portrait of Abraham Lincoln at 100 meters or something like that.
Oh,
And it's genuinely you get far enough away from it, and it's weird because the window looks like stained glass, but it's kind of. We would see it now as a pixelated approach, but it's really big pixels. It's only 8 or 12 pixels, and yet they resolve into Lincoln.
Wow.
And yet he conceived of the whole thing pre-digital. So he didn't have, it wasn't the technology informing his. So I think he was a really optically savvy artist in ways that I don't understand. But surrealism, it was big for me as a teenager, not so much anymore.
Right. There you go. Picasso.
Another one that, is one of the greats, but not a terribly big influence. I respect his work. I think it's interesting, his command, his simplicity, and he has I feel like he's got a forthrightness, an emotional honesty that's really solid. I mean, Guernica, fuck, dude. I mean, that by itself. He's almost too big of an artist to consider. I don't even understand. He did so many different things.
Yeah.
I feel like I haven't given all of it a serious look. I really love his sculpture a lot.
Okay.
He did some sculptures that I really loved. And, and his, I'm going to say that he deserves to be as famous as he is.
Next one, Frida Kahlo.
Another one that fits into the unfortunate cartoon category. Sadly so, I think. And probably, I think, someone that's largely eclipsed by her famous husband as well. You see that thing making the rounds on social media that was a clip of a newspaper article from, I want to say, the 30s or the 40s that was master muralist's wife gleefully dabbles in painting. It's a picture of Frida Kahlo.
Damn.
Gleefully dabbles is not the fucking deal at all.
No, not at all. It's the worst representation.
Yeah, so I think it's really sad. And then, you have that, they tried to make a Frida Kahlo Barbie recently.
Oh, did they?
Which, again, very beautiful, sort of the antithesis of a Barbie to my mind. How could it, it still had the cookie cutter Barbie body and didn't have the unibrow, I think.
Oh, really?
So I think it was one of those classic things where it was a feud in the inheritors of her estate. You know what I mean?
Okay.
There were a couple people who were cool with it and some that weren't, and but I think she's a wonderful artist. Again, not somebody that I look at a lot anymore, but I loved, especially as a young artist, I loved the personal nature of her work and just how like bloody it was, like literally, and just in the sense of like her vulnerability, emotionally in her work was really powerful to me, you know, and that being honest about that kind of vulnerability and pain and suffering could be cathartic, not just to her to work through it by painting those things, but then to other people who have shared similarly horrible experiences, but those experiences, they still feel trapped in private with those experiences because they haven't been able to connect with someone who's experienced them, you know?
Yeah.
I think that isolation depresses people. But, yeah, so I think her work's wonderful. I'm glad that it's well appreciated. But again, like now for my personal taste, it's not so... it's heavy-handed and over-emotive for what I'm interested in right now. But I still think it's wonderfully raw and honest, you know, and inventive too. You know, she did a lot of interesting things pictorially.
Yeah, for sure. Rothko,
love him. Yeah, that romantic strain is definitely strong in my work. The emotionalism, all of it, you know. Even down to the formal things, you know, like subtle color shifts and soft edges and. You know, the big scale. I mean, a small Rothko does not do what a big Rothko does, right?
Right.
You know. So yeah, I love his work. He haunts me to think about a little bit, just the arc of his work and his life, and the fact that he committed suicide. You know, because you look at his work and you get that sense sitting in front of it of like, you know, the smallness of your human concerns, you know, the vastness of everything. I love work that does that makes you feel like a speck of dust on a speck of dust. But Rothko, like, you know, I'm just haunted looking at it thinking, you know, maybe he was trying to remember, you know, trying to remind himself of that feeling of awe and joy. You know? Because he clearly grappled with some heaviness. Yeah. You know.
That's a super interesting take on it. Pollock.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to go with, you know, I think Lee Krasner should be as famous as he is. I think she might even be a better painter on the whole. You know, maybe not as innovative in the same ways. Like, I think he's amazing. Like, an amazing Pollock is really amazing. There's I love the graffiti-like quality of some of Pollock's paintings. You know? Like, I feel like he could have been a really cool tagger in another generation. You know, like, there's that. But, you know, I really like... yeah, but again, not necessarily a huge direct influence, but someone that I think is interesting. And again, someone I think perpetuates a lot of grandiose, destructive, romantic, kind of shitty cartoon myths about artists.
For sure.
You know, not to say that that's not who he really was or who Van Gogh really was, because pretty clearly it was. But, you know, I like the story about him pissing in Peggy Guggenheim's fireplace at a party, too. You know, like, those stories are all fun. You know, they're like Rolling Stones tour stories or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, but I think that eclipses the art, you know, to some extent. And I like the great ones in New York, you know, like some of the ones at the Met or the Guggenheim are pretty incredible to stand in front of. But I feel like there's certain special ones, you know, and then there's a lot of them that I've seen that haven't done much for me.
I see. Yeah, I haven't seen enough Pollocks in person to really sway me one way or the other about his work. But yeah, for the most part, I'm not much of a fan of his. But I don't know if this might just be personal taste. I mean, Josh in particular rags on Pollock like almost every episode. So,
it's kind of punching bag.
Yeah, in a way. But yeah, I mean, it's more so, it's not so much that the work itself, he's like really negatively, it's more like the importance that people put on him. He doesn't buy it.
Yeah, and I think that's the conversation for so many of these things is it's like what we're really discussing is not the work, but the canonization of it.
Exactly, yeah.
You know, and I think that's always, you know, I don't think we could ever write ourselves out of, like, that judgment, right? And say, you know what I mean? Because if I were the one making the critical judgments, then by God, we should all live by it, right? You know, my assessments are the correct ones. And of course, that's just the tyranny of personal taste.
Sure.
So that's my skepticism of art history generally, is that it's always someone trying to weave those sorts of narratives, which are always sort of self-serving. But art history is a really interesting subject all the same. And I think it's really, really hard to look at someone like Pollock from our present perspective. You know what I mean? To appreciate the shock of Monet at his time, or the shock of Pollock during his time, I think it's almost impossible for us to replicate, to really fully get how dissonant those paintings seemed.
It's just so out of context, because it's just, I mean, after the fact, you know, it's like you can only imagine I don't know. Yeah. So
I think, but then I think a lot of these people are really important as trailblazers, as people who ask questions about what a painting could be, that people are still teasing out. You know, at the time, it was a radical argument for him to propose that was a painting. And so that was just an argument, and then it either got in the door or it didn't. But the question never got explored with a lot of nuance at that time. But there have been a lot of painters unpacking territory that he opened up ever since. And I think a lot of them do things that are really interesting. Like I see a lot of abstract painters that come out of him and de Kooning, you know, that I think are doing fascinating work, you know. So it's kind of like if it speaks to you, you know, just like there's a lot of people now, like more pop, surrealist kind of artists like Robert Williams or whatever, who are like pulling so much from like Bosch and Bruegel and things that are from a totally different cultural context. You know, I'm way off in the weeds over here. Do you have any other questions?
Just got two more names. Shepard Fairey.
Not a fan, man. Not a fan. Yeah, really. Okay, he could go on my hate list.
All right, there you go.
Although I think the Obama image, you know, is pretty awesome, that poster.
Yeah.
But I, you know, since then I've started to I don't like the cheese dickery of that woman, you know, the Muslim woman with the American flag hijab. Like the whole thing feels just fucking a little easy, right? Like
right. Yeah.
I'm not saying that the sentiment behind it is bad. It's more that I agree politically, but this dishonestly oversimplifies the issues at hand.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like this woman actually doesn't represent very many people, for one thing. You know what I mean? Like he's kind of imagining, but it's the difference between Norman Rockwell. You know, I used to look at Norman Rockwell and be like, did he really think America was like this? You know, it's so loving and small town and kind of quaint. But then you see that, you know, with this later personal work, some of the stuff that dealt with racism, you can start to see that, he's painting his idealistic view of what this place would be like if it was peaceable kingdom style. You know what I mean? And that actually, there's really a lot of heart in that. And that's a kind of beautiful, hopeful thing to do. Yeah. But I needed more context on those images to see them for that. So maybe there's that about the aspirational part of Shepard Fairey. But largely, I feel like I'm not a big pop culture guy. So maybe I'll just leave it at that. But it's interesting how it all jumped the shark from stickers and graffiti to all of these different things. You know, I think his work and his career probably, you know, is an interesting discussion point about how we consume culture and where are the dividing lines between what's pop culture and what's high culture. Museums compete for entertainment dollars now, so is the whole thing just snobbery or? You know, he's a good propaganda artist. He'd be a propaganda artist in any age. I mean, he's just kind of I mean, he apes that, you know, 100% to a level that I can't tell how ironic it is.
Yeah, it's become not ironic anymore, right?
I don't think so. Or I'm not clear what his stance on it is, you know. But anyway, I admire the fact that he tries to be socially engaged, but I think he's overly simplistic. It irritates the shit out of me.
Yeah.
You know?
Right. No, that's a really good assessment. I think that I can pretty much agree with that wholeheartedly. Your take on that. And speaking of pop culture, the last name, Bob Ross.
Oh, man. So Bob Ross is like a big one lately. When I got on the plane to go to Denver to do that workshop, there's a kid wearing a Bob Ross hat.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and then I just saw a guy the other day wearing a shirt that said, and this is a Bob Ross quote about like, remember all the mistakes you made? Look, now they're birds, not mistakes. Look, happy birds.
That's hilarious.
So, I mean, he has this, are we talking about Bob Ross as a meme, as a teacher of painting?
Whatever you want, whatever your snap judgment, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, where does his afro fit in the historical spectrum?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I don't know, man. Like, Bob Ross is awesome. I guess this is a urban legend, but so have you heard these stories about how he was like an Air Force drill sergeant or something? Uh-huh. Bullshit or no?
Oh, I just took it as fact because I don't know.
I think it's not actually. It's just a fun story, but
yeah, I wouldn't even know one way or the other. I was like, okay. I mean, it doesn't really affect, for me personally, it doesn't really affect what I think of.
For me, it adds this layer of psychological depth, where I'm like, well, you had this revelation of like, I'm now going to become a gentle person,
I see.
Mm-hmm.
The contrast is
obvious. I see.
All joy and no longer the disciplinarian. But yeah, no, I have no idea whether that's true. I mean, I don't know. If you watch the guy could paint, regardless of what you think about what he did with it,
Right.
Believe me, like I'm not in the market for a Bob Ross painting.
Right.
You know what I mean? But like at the same time, I don't know if that was I guess that was the same, like, now we have like the bars in the marina, right? Where you can go and for $30 you get some paints and 3 glasses.
Oh, sure.
3 glasses of Cabernet with your girlfriends, like that really rubs me the wrong way for some reason. I think Bob Ross is a much better way to sugarcoat painting and feed it to the masses.
I agree.
Yeah, man. I think he's just a pop culture icon, in my world. Like, I'd never really, like, there was never a period in my life where I actually watched him enough to have, like, a real opinion. But I do think it's funny that that's just, like, he seems universally loved. Like, everybody's like, oh, I like that guy. My fucking uncle. The guy that always had the weird jokes. And, like, he was a little different, but he was cool, man. He always had a different perspective.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that's pretty awesome because, like, that seems to cut across, like, all segments of society. Like, so, like, how weird is that he's such a relatable figure for so many people? Yeah. Like, I would have never anticipated, really. Who knows? Maybe it's just like his likable, jovial, like, yeah, the mistakes are birds. I don't know.
Yeah, because growing up, or even in art school when I was going, he was almost more like just a cult figure that, like, you just thought that, oh, it's just us artists who care.
It has this kitsch appeal, right? Of, like, like, I imagine that we think of him the same way as, like, a serious athlete would think of Richard Simmons or something. You know what I mean? Like, I saw this guy on TV and my mom's friends think that that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
So, Richard Simmons probably saved some lives, maybe Bob Ross kept Kyle from punching a hole in the drywall a couple times.
Right, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I do think his staying power is amazing. He seems to be getting more popular all the time. He's just like, really, he's got that kitsch appeal,
Yeah, and maybe that's why he's immune to, like, being too much, like, putting him too negatively, because, like, even to look at his work, you're just like, well, duh, like, look at what he's doing. Like, obviously it's not, like, high art, like, quote unquote.
Yeah, but Bob Ross didn't flirt with controversy, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, not even, like, unconventional portrayal of a sitter for a portrait, like the Madam X scandal, or, like...
Sure.
There's just no... there's no social critique implicit in the works of Bob Ross.
Right.
It's also minus, like, any type of pretentiousness or any...
Yeah, exactly. There's some sincerity
to
it.
Hippie vibe of, so it's like...
Dude, is that the last, like, non-pretentious point of reference that most people have for art before they reach adulthood? Like... Because that's a really sad thought if that's so. You know what I mean? Not to say... And I'm not knocking Bob Ross, but... So I had a period where... I started teaching classes for kids, and this was like a totally new thing to me, but it just fell in my lap. I was teaching private lessons for adults, and then a friend was like, my cool friend has a cool kid. Could he take private lessons? Yeah, cool. And that was cool. And then I started teaching kids. And I had this whole like wrestling match of like, what do you teach a kid about art? You know what I mean? Like teaching an adult was a different thing. Like usually they come with like a punch list of things that they want to learn. You know, I went to school in the 70s or 80s and they didn't teach me how to draw, you know, or I don't understand color mixing, or like, you know, with kids. And so I started studying up developmentally, like what's going on with children. And I read this book that was talking about how there's a psychological watershed, like around 12 years old, where like when kids are drawing, and this was interesting to me because it happened to me, I suddenly hit this point where I started to personally connect with drawing more. And it was because of what I was talking about earlier. Like I could draw, you know, a picture of the kid I didn't like in a graveyard with some skeletons, or, you know, a bird pooping on the teacher or whatever. And I could connect to it that way. There's a point in the development, I guess, where kids initially, you say, draw me a train, and the kid will just draw whatever, kind of like a picture is more like writing. It's more like a hieroglyphic. Like, you know, they draw whatever their best approximation of a train is, the best way that they've learned to do it. And then it's done. There's no room for improvement. And then around 10 or 12, the naturalism starts to creep in, and there starts to be some kids that can draw more from observation, look more closely. But they're really just trying to impress people socially. They're trying to push their drawing language further. And it struck me that most people don't develop past that point artistically. Most adults don't go past that high school art class or that 2 years that they learned a foreign language or played an instrument in school, you know. And that struck me as so sad that, like, I'm not talking about like as it exists as a way to make a living. I mean, I don't know that I would recommend being an artist to anybody. It's a, you know, it's a hustle. It's
right.
Not exactly straightforward, but in terms of just people no longer, like at what point does that stop becoming an acceptable activity? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is it when you should be studying for SATs and thinking about going to school? Is it when you should be getting a job? Is it when you pick your mom up at the hospital or from rehab? Or like, what the fuck is it? You know, like, I'm going deep, dark places with Bob Ross. but it really is interesting to me in the sense that he made it accessible as an activity to people. That like you could go paint a picture, like you could go paint a picnic, and there's nothing wrong with that. And it's not bougie. I don't know. That's interesting. He's like, I don't know. Oprah figure for a certain part of the population. I guess who knows? Maybe he never really liberated anybody to be an artist. I don't know what his impact is. I
think it's fairly subtle.
A kitschy thing mostly. I think maybe I was just speculating too deeply about it. I think it's mostly just that he's kind of funny looking and he's a character. And like, you know, it's all kind of cute.
Right.
You know.
I don't know. Yeah, I think there's something too that everybody has him like he's a weird cultural touchstone for artists, and maybe because he was the only representation of art in the 80s and 90s that most people were.
I think maybe that's it. Maybe that's the only. You know, there weren't that many places that it really poked into pop culture, right? Like when we were younger. What other images of a painter do you have from when you were younger?
I mean, just like in cartoons, the person with the beret, you know. So yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right, that thing.
The thumb, the measuring thumb.
Right. But, beret, striped shirts, cigarettes. These are some of the ways you can tell.
Exactly. Well, cool, man. This was very deep discussion. It went all over the place. Well,
welcome to my brain. You can run away now.
Anything you got coming up soon that you want to let people know about?
Well, a couple things I'm excited about, and thanks for that opportunity.
Yeah.
I'm going to Italy for the summer to paint, which is really exciting.
Sweet.
I'm going to be doing a residency at the JSS in Civita program.
Sure.
Which
is that with Israel Hirschberg?
That's Israel Hirschberg's deal, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, that looks really cool.
It's going to be super cool. My friend Claudia Rilling, who lives in Philly, is going to be there. Chris Liberti might be there. Anyway, I mean, it attracts a pretty amazing group of painters from all over the world.
I bet,
year.
yeah.
And so I'm super excited to just hang out in that company. We're going to go see some Piero frescoes, and there's going to be a trip down to, there's a big Caravaggio show in Naples that we're all going to get to go see. And then, aside from that, I'm just going to be outside Rome painting the landscape for 6 weeks, which sounds thrilling. And then I'm going to get to spend a week in Rome, and I'm sure that'll feel like a long day.
Man.
And then, later in the year, I'm involved in, I've got some paintings in a book called Disrupted Realism that's coming out.
Cool.
It's written by John Seed,
who
is a curator and a professor, art writer. He studied painting, too. He's had a really interesting life in the arts. But, he put together this book that's got a whole bunch of, I think, about close to 40 artists in it. It's a very international project, and I'm really pleased to be included in that. So that book comes out in the fall. And then towards the end of the year, there's a show at Stanek Gallery in Philadelphia that is going to be related to that book, and they're going to try to have something from every artist that's in the book in the show, and we'll see how that works out. But so I should have something in that one. And some other things, but they're too back burner to even to even medium distance announce like that for right now. But that's a really exciting project. It's going to be a really cool book, and I can't wait to read sort of all the different essays and just kind of. I think he's really doing the community a service and like putting forward an intelligent discussion about that sort of painting, because you see so many people trying to paint like that now, kind of aping the style or look of it. Like, who are the most egregious Alex Kanevsky knockoffs out there? It's like a pretty loaded question that I won't even answer, because I think we all know. We all have eyes. You can't hide your influences. You know what I mean? I would never try to pretend not to have been influenced by him, but hopefully he's just one person who is in there in the stew. I remember reading in an interview somewhere, somebody said the only thing to do with influences is to have so many that nobody can pull them all apart, and I think that's
exactly that's how I feel about it.
Well, and that's being alive to your own art. I don't think it's so much in being original as it is in like finding your own voice and finding what you have to say, and then the originality comes from that. It comes from the fact that your experience is like the experience of no other person, and it's just that quiet, like you can't help but be different. And that in that small way, I think we've all seen lots of artists who try really hard to be different and to be original, like we were talking about. It's become an imperative of the contemporary art world, and I think a lot of times that doesn't lead to anything I'm interested in looking at or hearing about. It just
the sake of being different, just to be different, right? It's like
because I think there's a pot of gold at the end of that, originality.
And for some of them there is for a minute. That was the one good moment in. Did you see that movie Art School Confidential?
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
So on the whole, I was a little disappointed because there's just I feel like making fun of the art world and art school is just like shooting fish in a barrel. There's just a lot to play with there.
Yeah.
But that scene where he goes to his teacher's house and he's looking around at the paintings on the walls, he's like, "Are these yours?" "Yeah, these are mine." "That green triangle over there?" "Yeah, that's me. I was one of the first." 1971. Nobody painted a green triangle before me. Not Giotto, not the ancient Egyptians. It's just exactly. That whole thing is hilarious to me.
Dennis, you got anything coming up?
Wait, what?
Yeah, we're gonna switch focus.
This ain't my podcast.
Well, I don't know.
Podcast.
Yeah, wait, but what are you doing? I saw you were in Japan. You're a man about the world.
Yeah, well, just interesting timing, because it's like, I literally just got back from travels 3 days ago.
Wow.
So I'm trying to for one, just kind of settle back in and yeah, I mean, I was like in Japan for 10 days, and then I came back for 2 days, and then I went to New York for 5, and so it's just kind of like a mix of all that. And then prior to the travels, like I actually moved into a new apartment, so
wow, that's a lot.
I've yet to even get set up, and I'm not even set up right now to do any art, so it's kind of like I'm kind of like still in a transition state, but it's like definitely.
So no shows or anything on the horizon right now?
I think the only thing I have coming up is like I have a solo, like a mini solo show at San Jose in this spot that's like a half retail space, half gallery.
Okay.
But aside from that, just like conventions in the fall. But for the most part, I just want to get to a point where I just want to develop just a new body of work, just kind of based off of a lot of things I've been influenced by. I mean, just everything from like traveling, what other artists are up to, and I don't know, just kind of like a mix of things where I'm like really eager to just get in some type of studio setup and just create. So
cool.
I imagine.
That's kind of where I'm at right now. Well, to conclude, I mean, thanks again for your time, man.
So nice to meet you guys both. You know, and I've been enjoying your work online for a while, so this is a cool surprise to get to meet you.
Well, thanks. I'm flattered.
Likewise to you, Sergio. And thanks for taking the time to come and talk with me. It's been great talking to you guys.
Yeah, likewise.
I'd like to give big thanks to Hank and Osito for keeping mostly quiet during this whole thing, and for being such good painting advisors.
Shout out.
They always tell me, put the cadmium right away. You don't need that.
Let's see. I got a portrait at the Modern Eden self-portrait show. That's tonight. Well, this will come out Tuesday, but it'll be up through the end of June. And Josh Lawyer has a couple of 5x5s up at the Ben Gallery mini show that they're doing right now. So I think that's what I got to plug. But awesome. Well,
hey, Ben's a great spot. I just visited them when I was in Denver, and they really have nice space, great people, show a bunch of good artists. Some of my 5x5s might even be next to us. You never know.
Oh, sweet. There you go.
They got a bunch in the racks.
Nice.
That's awesome.